Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
Archie, you've got to understand. Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes. It's my mother. I can't put her out on the street. You mean how she put you out on the street almost as a child and without a dime? Have you already forgotten? Archie asked irritably. How can you compare? She was in a clouded state of consciousness then. She didn't realize what she was doing. And now she's come to her senses. She's come to her senses all right. Archie was angry beyond belief. For over 10 years, she'd been on her own, living on her own. And then I remembered about my daughter. By the way, how did she find you? You didn't recognize her? I'm sure mine wouldn't have told her anything. It doesn't matter, Archie. Lucy wasn't going to think about such trivialities. All that matters is that she's with me now and she wants to get back together. And anyway, just because she's made a mistake doesn't mean I have to take revenge on her for the rest of my life. That's it, Archie. It's out of the question. Mom's going to live with us. I'm not kicking her out. Archie didn't like this decision. He understood that Lucy had missed her mother all these years, and now she was just happy about her appearance and was unable to take a critical view of the situation. He himself did not believe the old woman who had appeared a few hours ago on the doorstep of their apartment for a second. But he couldn't quarrel with Lucy either. It looked like he'd have to put up with having a mother-in-law named Betty for a while. For now, he thought, we'll sort it out as we go along. Either way, I'm not going to let her hurt Lucy. Betty, then just Betty, had given birth to a daughter at the age of 25. And that was it. As she saw it, her life was over. Betty never married. First, she studied hard, not wanting to be distracted by her classmates. Then she worked just as diligently, occasionally accepting signs of attention from colleagues and casual suitors, but did not take them seriously. She was waiting for a real big love, and this love came to her in the form of a random business traveler who came to their city for a month for work. The man was older than Betty by 7 years, was tall and slender, decently dressed and well-mannered. He wooed the girl beautifully, gave luxurious bouquets of flowers, took her to dinner in hotel restaurants for some reason, each time in different ones, walked around the night city, read poems, said compliments. In short, everything was almost like in the movies, like in a beautiful fairy tale. The farewell at the train station was quite cinematic. She cried and hugged him, he kissed her, promised to write and call, and to return to his beloved as soon as work would allow. He waved at her from the vestibule of the departing train and shouted his love, and she ran after him all the way to the end of the platform. For a while, Betty spent her time in rosy dreams, waiting to hear from her lover and composing to him affectionate and passionate letters, which for the time being were piling up in her desk drawer. He said before he left that he was going to another city on business and would not be home until a month later, so there was no point in sending her epistolary confessions any sooner. She remembered their meetings, conversations, kisses, and then she found out that she was pregnant. At first, this news only pleased the girl. It is clear that now it remains only to inform her lover about the future child, and he, as an honest man, will immediately take her to the registry office. They would get married, and then there would come such a life, imagining which Betty only squinted with pleasure, and her head began to spin sweetly. In reality, however, everything turned out to be quite different from her dreams. When Betty dialed the phone number left to her by her lover, she heard a stern voice from the receiver. Dormitory. What dormitory? She didn't understand. Dormitory number 3 of the Mech Press plant, the stern voice explained. Who do you want me to call? Betty apologized and hung up. Deciding that she had dialed the wrong number, the girl tried calling several more times, but always got the same stern, hostile janitor. He must have mixed up the numbers when he wrote it down, the young woman decided. He wrote that at the station in a hurry. He certainly could not live in a hostel. The address left by the lover was an apartment address. Betty sent a letter to her prince, paying extra at the post office for urgent delivery. But the envelope returned a week later marked addressee not found or dropped off. Utterly puzzled, Betty decided to call the information center of the city where her lover should live. They told her that the house at the address had been demolished a year ago and was now a vacant lot. Give me at least a middle name or year of birth, said the directory clerk. Or better yet, Both. Betty didn't know either of those things, as there was no reason to ask about such trivialities while she was engrossed in the novel. You wouldn't ask for a passport from a man who met you every night with bouquets, carried you in his arms, read poetry, kissed you so much that your legs shook. Suddenly, she realized that she didn't even know what organization her John was visiting or what hotel he was staying in. In fact, Betty had never been in his room. They met at various restaurants and slept at her house almost daily. Betty lived in a separate apartment, so she didn't see the need to linger in faceless and uncomfortable hotel rooms. Not knowing what to think, she dialed the phone number John had left for her. When she heard the expected stern dormitory, she suddenly cried and told the stern voice everything as it was. "Please," she said, "see if you have such a man living with you, John. Maybe he was just too embarrassed to tell me that he was from the dormitory. You never know. I don't know what to do now. Help me. I really need to find him." "Oh, girl," suddenly sighed a stern voice from the tube, and a little softened. "I would love to find him too." And in the eyes of his shameless look, "Not a month goes by that some girl of your John is not looking for him. He's got a habit of messing with girls' heads and leaving our phone number when he leaves. I've heard all sorts of things, and crying and begging and promising money to call him. But you're the first to get pregnant, I guess." It took Betty a while to realize what had been said. When the janitor's words reached her, she just burst into tears and hung up the phone. It became clear that it was no longer worth hoping for a happy love and cloudless family life. She had to muddle through on her own. Betty went to the gynecologist for a referral for an abortion. But it turned out that the search for a lover, she missed the deadline for this procedure. After several consultations, including paid, Betty realized she would have to give birth. Not to say that this consideration pleased her. The girl was neither psychologically nor financially ready for motherhood. Betty had neither a husband nor any of the most insignificant suitors. Friends with whom she could consult, get their help and support. There was no two Betty supported with the women around her friendly relations, but no more. But most importantly, her parents. Evan and Barbara lived in a village 200 kilometers from the city. Their daughter had gotten a separate apartment so that nothing would distract her from her studies. And every time they met or called, her father would chastise Betty. "Look, daughter, the apartment is your own, so use it wisely. Do not organize parties, companies do not drive, do not bring men. Study, settle in. And if you bring it in your hem, I'll whip you like a goat, and I'll evict you to the street." Betty had long since finished her studies and had turned from a teenage girl into an independent young woman with a good position. But Evan persisted in repeating his command every time he spoke to his daughter. Knowing her father's strict nature, Betty couldn't even think of confessing her pregnancy to her parents. Well, she decided, we'll have the baby and hide it from her grandfathers. There's no other way out anyway. The strange thing is that Betty's plan succeeded. She managed to hide her daughter from her family for quite a long time, about 10 years. The woman made it a rule to call her parents every week or even more often, so as not to give the impression that she was hiding from them. But if Evan and Barbara wanted to visit or simply said they were going into town on business, Betty would talk herself out of it as best she could. She made up busy work schedules, invitations to friends' birthdays, theaters, dates, the need to help a friend, anything to keep her parents from coming to her house. She knew perfectly well that even if she gave her daughter to a neighbor for the time of their visit, she would not be able to hide the child's presence in the apartment. Evan sometimes lamented, "Betty, we gathered some guests for you, meat, pickles. Let's bring them over, at least to give them to the neighbors." But even against this, Betty objected very actively. It's impossible that parents communicate with neighbors and even just appear in her yard. There was bound to be some talkative grandmother who would say something about the child, and that would be the end of it. "Why do you have to go around, Daddy?" she said cheerfully. "It's a long way to my neighborhood. Let the presents lie there, and I'll come to you next week and pick them up. They won't go rotten, I guess." And she honestly came and picked them up every time after her parents' unsuccessful trip. She left Lucy's daughter for the time of these visits to the village with her neighbor Selena, at first explaining that the girl was too young for the long journey, and then not explaining anything at all. The fact that Lucy periodically remains in the family Barbarican gradually became the norm. The need to hide strongly undermined Olia from the inside. The young woman herself did not notice how she became ashamed of her daughter not only in front of her parents, but also in front of everyone around her. It constantly seemed to her that neighbors, colleagues, and just passersby know that she raises her daughter without a husband and condemn her. They probably think she's a slut, or even worse, that she was married, but the man did not keep. She turned out to be a bad hostess, a worthless wife. Walking with Lucy, she constantly shrank into a lump inside herself, fearing unpleasant looks. At work, she almost never mentioned her daughter, fearing the judgment of her colleagues. In the kindergarten, she avoided conversations with teachers and other parents, and every time she waited for them to point fingers at her, to shame her, to laugh at her. In public, Betty carefully kept her face, making herself look independent and proud. But at home, she would lash out at Lucy, scolding her daughter for the slightest offense or for a carelessly spoken word. She could pounce on the girl with mats because of the fact that she long-buttoned a sandal or dripped juice on the polished table, or just inappropriately approached with a request to read a book or watch a drawing. Soon the matter ceased to be limited to scolding. Betty hit her daughter with anything, and just a palm, and a belt from a jacket, and a carpet beater, and a boot, and a wet towel, and a cord from an extension cord, anything that came to hand. At times of such outbursts, the woman had no control over herself, and when the irritation subsided, she was ashamed of them and felt guilty in front of her daughter. Moreover, Lucy, having sobbed after a scandal somewhere in the corner of the apartment, always first came to make peace with her mother. She would approach her mother, hugging Betty, burying her nose in her, and quietly asking, "Mom, you're not angry anymore." "I'm not angry, my daughter," Betty replied shamefacedly. "I'm sorry I snapped." "I forgive you," Lucy said, stroking her mother's head or hand. "I love you." Those words made Betty want to cry even more. The guilt, the feeling of being wrong, the shame of being ashamed of herself, the need to hide from her parents all the time, none of it was good for her psyche. She became nervous and hysterical, and on her face, despite the carefully built mask of impregnability, began to show an expression of fear and battered. The day when Betty went to enroll her daughter in school turned everything upside down. In the school reception area sat a genteel-looking secretary, an elderly woman with a strict hairdo, in an impeccably ironed dress with a white lace collar. Betty handed her the documents and a pre-filled questionnaire, and she quickly ran her eyes over them. "Why is the information about the parents not completely filled out?" she asked. "I see the mother's name, but where is the father's?" "No father," Betty said. "I'm on my own." "I see." The secretary looked at Lucy's birth certificate and then scrutinized Betty from under her glasses from head to toe. "I'll put a note on your form. Single mother." This status was far from new to Betty. It had followed her from the registry office, where she had drawn up the documents for Lucia, through all the kindergartens, milk kitchens, and polyclinics. He allowed her to receive some benefits, but he also seemed deeply offensive to the woman. She had put up with it for a while, but today, for some reason, whether it was the gracefulness of the secretary or the look she gave her, Betty realized she couldn't take it anymore. "Bid whatever you want," she almost shouted and stormed out of the reception area. She ran to work, not remembering herself, and there she collapsed on the sofa in the employee lounge and burst into tears, unable to hold back any longer. She rolled around on the couch, pounded her hands on the backrest and cushions, howled, scratched the upholstery, choked on her tears. A colleague, one of the employees of their audit department, a dry and usually taciturn woman, came to her rescue. Having found Betty and assessed her condition, the colleague first locked the door of the room from the inside, then grabbed the woman on the couch, hugged her tightly, and held her there, stroking her head until Oli's hysterics were over. Then she told the woman to wash her face, poured a glass of water with some kind of sedative in it, sat her down on the couch, and sat down beside her. "Betty," she said affectionately, "I can see that something is happening to you. I won't ask you for details. If you want them, you can tell me when you're ready. But I can see that you need psychological help, and I know a place that can help you. You're sending me to a mental institution." Betty snorted. She was embarrassed in front of her colleague for witnessing her hysterics, and she didn't know how to behave. "Why go to the asylum?" she objected. "I want to help you, not destroy you." "No, not at all. There is a place where you will be accepted by anyone with any of your problems and help you solve them. If you want, we can visit it after work today." Let's visit. Betty agreed, shrugging her shoulders. After everything that had happened, she felt uncomfortable refusing. That's how she got to the meeting of the Brothers and Sisters organization. And from that day, as she thought of it, her life began anew. In the spacious bread hall sat people, many people, all kinds of people. Men and women, young and old, and even frankly old, in expensive suits and in greasy jeans, beautiful, well-groomed, and frankly ugly, different. At the end of the hall, on a small dais stood a large man. He had a completely secular appearance, but everyone gathered called him Father Jack. The man spoke, addressing the audience. There is sin in all of us, and that is normal. There are no sinless people. That is the condition of our life. We are born with a pure heart and an open soul. The spark of God burns in each of us from birth. But during our life, under the influence of external circumstances, our soul begins to be filled with garbage, first small, then large. It prevents our spark from burning in full force. All its heat goes to burn the dirt that has come into our souls, but it is not always enough. Our open soul is used by dirty, evil, unworthy people. They draw us into deception, entice us to commit sin, and we succumb to them because we have no experience in resisting temptation. We commit sin and carry it with us through life, and we are tormented by it. We blame ourselves for having sinned. We begin to see ourselves as low, unworthy, unclean, and we forget that there is a part of sin in everyone. Yes, in everyone. When someone reproaches you for wrong behavior, says that you live unworthily, know that he is not talking about you, but about himself. With these attacks, he is just trying to dull the pain that his own sin, once committed, brings him every minute. Be stronger and wiser than such people. Forgive them. Try to bring them to the light. Everyone can come to the light, no matter how unclean he may seem to himself. You only need to accept your sin and atone for it in word and deed. Through this, you will be cleansed from the garbage inside you, and you will allow the spark of God inside you to burn again in full force. You will once again be at peace with yourself and the world. Recognize, accept, and redeem in word and deed. It is a big job, but the brothers and sisters will help you do it. Here in the hall are people who have already gone through the cleansing procedure and have changed their lives for the better. You know about them. Many of them have already become your helpers on the way of deliverance from sin. Betty listened, and every word resonated with her. It seemed to her that Father Jack was talking about her. Had she not been an open-hearted girl with a pure soul when she met John? Had he not led her into sin by deceit and temptation? Was it not due to the circumstances of life, the birth of a daughter, her father's ironclad principles, the need to lie, that her soul was filled with dirt and filth? Life happened as it happened, and Betty thought she would have to drag her dirt with her to the end. But it turns out it can be cleaned up, and there are people willing to help her. Could it really be? After the general meeting, Father Jack, who had been warned in advance about the new girl, invited Betty into his office. He spoke to her so tenderly, so sensitive and attentive, that Betty suddenly told him her whole story. She told him and froze, for she was about to be rebuked. But Father Jack said, "Poor girl, how much you've suffered." "Well, nothing, if you want. We will help you to cope with your suffering. You are already stronger than many who come here. You realize that you have sinned and you are ready to get rid of it. You have already done a lot of work within yourself, and you are a head taller than most newcomers to our society. Often people are afraid to admit their sinfulness to themselves, but you're not. You're doing a great job. I believe that the Herculean work you've done should not go to waste. I and the brothers and sisters can help you to continue to get rid of your sin, to atone for it in word and deed. Of course, if you want to." Of course, Betty wanted to. She was terribly afraid to tell about her life, and she was happy to receive not rejection but understanding and acceptance after telling. True, if she had told her parents the same thing, they would have received her no less affectionately than Father Jack. But Betty was never meant to know that. The Society of Brothers and Sisters was a banal, parochial sect. It was headed by Father Jack, alias Jack. About 10 years ago, he had graduated from the psychology department of the local medical university, but he had quickly become disillusioned with the work of a psychologist. The local psychoneurological dispensary scared him away by the small salary, Private clinics did not like the need to flatter clients and listen to the same complaints of fed-up housewives who had never had any psychological problems. Jack racked his brains and decided that he could find a more interesting and profitable use for his knowledge. At that time, with the advent of perestroika, the country began a boom on everything near mystical. Various sects and religious communities appeared. Folk healers appeared on TV. Politicians and businessmen did not hide the fact that they consulted in their affairs with psychics and astrologers. After some thought, Jack decided that the religious community format suited him best. He was tempted, of course, to become a personal fortune teller for some respectable businessmen. But there you'd be seen as a servant, and if you made a mistake, you'd be instantly wasted, Jack reasoned. And he wanted respect, adoration, admiration, obedience, and of course, a steady income. And a small flock could provide all that. A few years later, Walker was convinced that his idea was paying off. The Brothers and Sisters Society had several hundred members, and new ones were steadily coming in. Jack speculated on a sense of sinfulness. He insinuated to each newcomer that he had a serious sin that prevented him from living. It turned out to be quite simple. Every person knows for himself some unrighteous act or remembers an event that became a turning point in his life. With skillful presentation of information, this act or event acquired the status of sin and the main obstacle in all endeavors. It was easiest to work with women, almost all of whom had either had an abortion or had been unfaithful to their man, or had seriously thought about it. With men was more difficult, but Jack, thanks to a deep knowledge of psychology and good practice, and found something to hook them. It also helped that people who turned to the Brothers and Sisters were initially broken, not too sure of themselves. It was quite easy to convince them both of their own sinfulness and of the fact that in the society they would be helped to cleanse themselves of their filth. Atonement by word of mouth was practically a ritualized act, thought out in detail by Jack. And atonement for sin by deed involved the sinner donating part of his property to the community, that is, in favor of Jack Walker. For each stage, the parishioners were seriously prepared and processed so that parting with property was practically voluntary and without doubts. After that, the person was considered cleansed of sin and could start a new life without the support of society. If he was not ready to part with the brothers and sisters, he was offered to attend meetings and socialize with other novices as usual, on condition that he would donate 1/10 of his income to the society every month. Many agreed to this. At first, Jack was surprised at how many people accepted his terms without complaint, but then he realized that he was careful to impress upon the congregation that Brothers and Sisters was a place where they would be welcomed, good, bad, or downright evil, and help to cope with any problem. It gave people a sense of all-round support, and that is what parishioners agreed to pay for. There were some people, however, from whom there was nothing to take. For such people, Jack devised special tasks as redemption by deed. For example, if he saw in a man a gift to dispose people to himself, he assigned him as a penance to attract 10 newcomers to the Brothers and Sisters within a month. He assigned women to cater for mass meetings, making tea and coffee for the congregation, baking scones and cookies. The men were usually told to clean up after big events or to work for the community in some other way. His goals were not always self-serving. For example, several parishioners helped a poor grandmother from the community to repair her apartment as a redemption work. Another group spent the whole summer tending to the dacha of one of the community members who suddenly fell seriously ill, and at the same time took care of the community member herself. This fit in well with the concept of brothers and sisters will help you with any problem. There were also very special tasks as atonement by deed. For example, with the help of his sinners, Jack Walker bought a nice building for the Brothers and Sisters on the cheap. Initially, there was a cafe canteen, quite good and popular. The owner was not going to sell it, on the contrary, he was actively promoting his business. But Mishka got the reins under his tail. And for 3 months, several brothers and sisters actively spoiled the reputation of the institution. They planted rats and cockroaches in the kitchen and warehouses of the cafe. They made complaints to every possible authority, from SES to the fire department, and the cafe was plagued with inspections. They vomited in the dining room after eating a couple of spoonfuls of soup or side dishes. They made a mess in the sanitary facilities for visitors, stealthily tricked waiters, stole jackets from the racks. In addition to this was organized several defamatory articles about the cafe in the local press. And specially trained parishioners lingered in the surrounding yards and in long lines and spread their nasty rumors about the institution. The flow of visitors to the cafe dried up, and the owner was forced to close the business. Father Jack bought the building from him for mere cents, and the brothers and sisters involved in the operation received the long-awaited redemption of sins. Jack Walker did this sort of thing often enough. He had gotten good at brainwashing people, and his parishioners no longer asked questions about why it was necessary to commit a new sin to atone for one sin. They did whatever Father Jack told them to do, and if anyone tried to refuse, Jack knew how to persuade them. Among his flock was an employee of a detective agency and a young girl who was the mistress of one of the local FBI officers. With their help, he gathered information on his entire flock, their family and friends. This allowed him to control the financial situation of people, to understand who and how much he could get from, and who was better to use as labor force. And it also helped to keep the flock in line with the help of light blackmail. Father Jack arranged a 3-room apartment in the quiet center of the city, bought a nice country house, got a couple of cars for trips out of town and for traveling around the city. On his accounts accumulated quite a substantial amount of money that allowed him to live comfortably for a dozen years. But Jack Walker tasted something that was much tastier than wealth, unlimited power over people. So he was not going to stop the activities of this sect, and even on the contrary, he was thinking of taking it from the city to the regional level, and then to the level. But about all this Betty, of course, did not even guess. Regular communication with the brothers and sisters improved Betty's state of mind. After a few months, she became noticeably calmer and more confident. The woman stopped being afraid of slanted glances, forgot about the need to be shy of others, became more sociable and peaceful. After another year, she finally got rid of the guilt that constantly ate her. Betty reasoned that everyone had some sin, that is, her case was not an exception, but just a kind of norm. What was there to be ashamed of? What was there to be guilty about? The inner changes were also reflected in the woman's appearance. Her posture changed, her movements became smoother and calmer, her gait became easy. She began to take care of herself with pleasure, did new hairstyles, bought beautiful clothes, tried different makeup techniques. Experiments with appearance helped her to get acquainted with herself, new, calm, cleansed of sins. But in addition, they pursued another goal to attract the attention of Father Jack. Betty had fallen head over heels in love with the rector and secretly dreamed of someday winning his affection. For Jack Walker, her feelings were neither a secret nor a surprise. He was accustomed to having female parishioners fall in love with him from time to time, but he never allowed himself to approach one of them lest he bring discord into his flock. In this aspect, he preferred not to use his official position. Jack was careful with women in love, keeping the fires of passion alive, but not letting them grow into flames of passion that swept away everything in their path. Of course, he could just carefully nullify those feelings, but that, from his point of view, was not rational. It was easier to manipulate women in love than women who were fascinated by his teachings, but indifferent to him personally. In any case, falling in love had done Betty good. She had a purpose in life again, a reason to get up in the morning and enjoy the world around her. It's just a pity that all the positive changes in the woman did not affect her relationship to her own daughter. In Ola's head, clearly rooted in the idea that Lucy is her sin, inescapable, indelible, unredeemable. There was nothing left for her but to learn to live with it, and she had learned to the best of her ability. Betty stopped snapping at her daughter, scandalizing her, beating her for the slightest offense. Instead, it was indifference. The woman practically did not notice Lucy, did not talk to her, was not interested in her studies and hobbies. She made remarks to her daughter when she, in her opinion, behaved wrongly, but never praised her for good behavior and good deeds, taking it for granted. Affection was out of the question. When Lucy tried to hug or kiss her mother, to take her hand, Betty looked at her coldly and shied away from her daughter. She provided Lucy with everything she needed: food, clothes, school supplies, but never spoiled her with pretty outfits, sweets, or new toys. All the money that could be spent on things and entertainment for her daughter, the woman preferred to donate to brothers and sisters. Sometimes Betty tried to tell her daughter the basics of Father Jack's teachings, but Lucy refused to accept them, and the woman backed off, deciding that the child was too young for such serious talk. So it went on for about 4 years. Betty had planned to raise her daughter to the age of 18, and then either move her out of the house or join the brothers and sisters, and thus get rid of her sin. But all her plans came to a crashing halt one quiet Friday evening. Betty had finished cleaning up the kitchen after dinner when Lucy once again flew up to her with the words, "Mommy, look what I made on my mug. It's for you." Her daughter constantly tried to attract her attention with drawings or a diary full of A's or some crafts. Betty wasn't interested in any of it. The doorbell rang, and she pulled the girl away from her and went into the hallway. When she opened the door, the woman was frozen and speechless. On the threshold stood her mother, Barbara Betty. At her feet stood 2 large, round-sided travel bags that looked like well-fed, large-breed dogs. Betty had talked to her mother on the phone a couple days ago, but a visit had been out of the question then. The woman was confused, but Barbara smiled welcomingly, as if she hadn't noticed her daughter's embarrassment. "Hello, Betty," she said. "Sorry I didn't call, but I thought you should be home before the weekend. It all happened so fast, I didn't have time to warn you." She picked up her bags and stepped into the hallway, pushing Betty aside. She looked around. "It's a nice hallway you've got here, spacious and bright. At least I'll see how you live, what repairs you've made." Lucy's face peeked out of the door of the room. "Mommy, where are you? Who's there?" "Oh, hello." The girl stared curiously at the guest. The old woman looked at her curiously. "Mama, you say?" she asked. "Well, yes, this is Betty, my mom. Don't you know?" "Well, now I do," smiled Betty Sr. "Let's get acquainted. I'm Barbara, your grandmother. What's your name?" "Evan died last year." Barbara buried her husband, grieved, and realized that it was hard and boring to live alone in their house. She decided to move to the city, where she'd be more comfortable and closer to her daughter. She sold the car left by her husband and the land shares they had received when the collective farm was disbanded. She looked for a buyer for the house, but agreed with him that the deal would wait until she looked for an apartment in the city. The price of the house was agreed in dollars, so that from a possible delay Barbara did not lose anything. But the buyer, on the contrary, was interested in avoiding exchange rate fluctuations, and therefore actively participated in the search for a new apartment. It was he who eventually found her a nice one-room apartment with a large kitchen and a wide balcony, albeit in the cheapest part of town. Barbara called the sellers and came to the viewing, immediately taking with her the money for the deposit. They were going to look at the apartment on Saturday, and if everything worked out, they were going to make the deal in a week. Barbara planned to stay with her daughter during that time. Getting acquainted with her granddaughter was painless. The girl was terribly happy that now she had a real grandmother and filled the old woman with questions and stories. Lucy went to bed at midnight, full of impressions. Then Barbara and Betty sat down in the kitchen to talk. Contrary to expectations, her mother didn't scold her for giving birth without her husband or for hiding the baby for so long. She only complained that Evan had never seen her granddaughter, but otherwise she felt sorry for her daughter, who had suffered alone with the child and her spy games. But Betty did not need this sympathy and empathy. She more than received them in brothers and sisters. After stating the facts and listening to her mother for a while, she curtailed the conversation and sent Barbara to bed. Everything worked out with the apartment. While waiting for the deal and the old owners to move in, Batistris stayed with her daughter and granddaughter. For 2 weeks, she had time to look at the relations in their family and make some conclusions for herself. When the apartment was ready for occupancy, she suggested to Betty, "You know, I think Lucy would be better off with me. Give her to me. I've lived without a granddaughter for so many years, they'll make up for it." "Oh, Lucy, will you come and live with me?" "What about Mommy?" the girl asked. "And to Mom we will go to visit when she wants." "Agreed?" "Agreed," exclaimed Lucy, who for the past few days received more attention from her grandmother than from her mother for all the previous years. "Very well," said Betty in an indifferent tone. "I will pack Lucy's things." In her heart, she was glad to be rid of her sins sooner than expected. All her childhood, Betty had been convinced that adults were extremely unreliable people. It is impossible to guess when they will praise you and when they will scold you. There is no pattern to their mood swings. Exemplary behavior is no guarantee that you will be petted and called a good girl. Interesting things do not occupy them. Beautiful gifts are born to them, and in general, to spend time with children they do not seek. Such conclusions the girl made, observing her own mother, and extended them to the entire adult population of the planet. The only exception she considered was Aunt Selena, where her mother occasionally left her when she was busy. Aunt Selena was always in an even mood, never once raised her voice at Lucia or her son Archie, and it was impossible to imagine that she could hit children with her boots. She always listened attentively to Sashka's stories about school, checked his lessons, praised him for his A's. And with Lucy, she treated affectionately, read her books, taught her some small needlework. The girl seriously believed that Aunt Selena was the most reasonable woman of all her adult acquaintances, and was sincerely perplexed when Archie, under the influence of adolescence, was angry with her mother or told her that she did not understand anything. Aloud, she did not argue with Archie. The boy was about 5 years older than she was, and he seemed incredibly mature and serious. He was also very handsome. Over the years of neighboring, he got used to the girl and treated her like a little sister, interested in her affairs, protected her on walks from big dogs and angry boys, invented some games for her, taught her to ride a bicycle, sometimes joked with her without malice. He seemed like a fairy prince to Lucy. Deep down, she was in love with him and hoped that when she grew up, Archie would marry her. Moving in with her grandmother brought Lucy many discoveries. First of all, she finally saw grown-up people she could rely on. The first of these was Barbara herself. She didn't fight or scandalize. She clearly defined for her granddaughter what she could and could not do. She took care of the girl, spoiled her, remembered her promises to Lucy, and strictly fulfilled them. Then it turned out that grandmother's neighbors and friends behaved the same way. Gradually, Lucy looked at adult teachers, leaders of circles, sales clerks, parents of classmates, and found that in principle, they are not so bad. Each of them has its own patterns of behavior, and with each can get along, if these patterns know and take into account. The world was no longer scary and unfamiliar. It was slowly turning into a friendly friend that could be relied on. Barbara transferred Lucy to another school closer to home. There no one knew the girl as frightened and uptight, insecure and nervous. Her modesty was written off as the usual shyness of a newcomer, and they helped her overcome it. Soon Irishka had friends and even formed a friendly relationship with some teachers. Previously, the girl could not even think of such a thing, and for a long time it was strange to her that with an adult, with a teacher, you can talk freely, express your thoughts, disagree, and even argue. And this dispute would not end in punishment or scandal, but would be conducted within the framework of a normal dialogue. All these discoveries delighted and encouraged Lucia. She told Barbara Stepanovna about them with delight and shared them with Aunt Selena and Archie over the telephone. The only regret was that they couldn't be shared with her mother. Betty was completely removed from her daughter's life. She spent almost all of her free time at the brothers and sisters, rushing there in the evenings after work, disappearing there all weekend. She used all her spare money for the needs of the community and was extremely proud of it. She would have donated her apartment to the brothers and sisters, but the guardianship authorities stopped her. Lucy was registered in the apartment, and until she came of age, the girl could not be discharged, and therefore it was impossible to dispose of the apartment freely. Betty had tried to get her mother to sign her granddaughter in a couple of times, but Barbara realized what it could turn out to be and refused flatly. Over the years, living with her grandmother, Lucy had seen her mother 4 times, and about 10 times she had talked to her on the phone. Barbara explained her granddaughter's behavior as best she could. She told her about the cult, told her that her mother had fallen under the influence of too many strangers and did not belong to herself. She assured her that Lucy was not to blame for anything, that there were problems that only adults could deal with. Children could not handle them. The girl would not succeed in keeping her mother away from the community of her father Jack, no matter what she did, no matter how she behaved. The only thing Lucy could do now was hope that her mother would come to her senses and continue to love her, or at least respect her for giving her life, raising her, feeding and clothing her for so long, Barbara said. Lucy tried to believe her. She missed her mother all through her childhood, until she was 17. After high school, Betty went to technical school to become an accountant. She and her grandmother had decided that it was necessary to first acquire a profession, with the help of which you can feed yourself, and then proceed to higher education. Lucy understood perfectly well why her grandmother insisted on it. The two of them were living on Barbara's small pension, and it had become noticeably insufficient. The girl worked part-time when she had the opportunity, but her earnings were so small that they could not save the situation. She and her grandmother would still have a couple of years of technical school, but 5 years at the university would be gone. Barbara died in early September. Lucy came home after technical school and found her grandmother sitting at the sewing machine. The girl from the threshold began to tell the old woman something, at the same time changing clothes, turning on the kettle in the kitchen, walking around the apartment. Only after a few minutes she noticed that her grandmother, for some reason, she did not answer. The doctors later said it was a blood clot. It happens. Death came instantly. Barbara did not suffer, and it calmed Lucy a little. She called Betty to tell her the news, but as usual, she didn't find her at home. She didn't have her mother's work phone. She had to call them and asked Aunt Selena to give her mother the information. The neighbor called back in the late afternoon. "Lucy, I told Betty everything you asked," she said. She nodded, said thank you, and went to her room. "There's nothing more I can tell you." Mother didn't call back that day or the next. There was money for the funeral. Her grandmother had warned Lucia more than once that it was in a box in the sideboard. The dress, slippers, towels, handkerchiefs, and everything else needed for the burial were kept there as well. Plus, each of Barbara's kind-hearted neighbors and friends who came to the funeral slipped Lucy 100, a 500, and 1,000. Aunt Selena came too. She said that Archie had some business to attend to and couldn't get away, but she sent her sincere condolences to Lucy. She slipped a little envelope into her pocket too. Betty never showed up. Returning from the funeral and went to the devastated apartment, Lucy counted the cash. It turned out that all the expenses for the ritual had been completely repaid. Even more, on the amount of money given out by hearty neighbors, it was possible to live for 4 months, and if you squeeze, then with half a year. Damn funerals, it turns out. Not a bad way to collect money from the population, sarcastically thought the girl, and burst into tears sitting on the floor near her grandmother's couch. It was possible to live, but how to live, she did not understand. Lucy could not get through to Betty, but she talked to Aunt Selena every evening. 2 or 3 times a week the girl was visited by her grandmother's friends, all of them in turn. They brought her some pies and other homemade food, checked the condition of the apartment, had long warm conversations with Arishka about everything in the world. Little by little the girl's grief dulled. She began to look at the world again with the same confidence. She did not miss a single class at the technical school and was on a good account there. Lucy found a small part-time job as a cleaner, but she had to start somewhere. She looked after the apartment, kept it clean and tidy, so as not to fall foul of her grandmother's friends. She even accepted a couple of date invitations from boys from the parallel course. So little by little 6 months passed, and then Lucy's quiet life collapsed completely. One evening there was a demanding ring at the door. Lucy opened the door and gasped as Betty stood on the doorstep. "Mommy." "Hi," the girl said incredulously. "Come in." "Hi," said Betty grudgingly. "I need the deeds to the apartment." "Do you know where they are?" "The papers." "For the apartment?" Lucy had expected anything but that. "The papers for my grandmother's apartment," Betty repeated a little slower, very clearly, as if she were talking to a lunatic. "I need to register the inheritance. For that I need the certificate of ownership, the contract under which the apartment was bought." "Inheritance?" Lucy still didn't understand. "Inheritance, inheritance," repeated Betty, already irritated. "My mother died. I am her direct heir, so I need to register the apartment on myself." "Why are you standing there like a pole? Let me live for myself. The papers are probably in the closet or in the secretary." She pushed the girl away, resolutely went into the apartment and began to look through the contents of the secretaire, commenting on it aloud. "So, utility bills, that'll come in handy. Employment history, no need for that. Warranty cards? My God, what a lot of junk. Ah, here." Betty pulled out a thin transparent folder and took a quick look at its contents. Everything seemed to be in place. "Oh, and I need my mom's death certificate." "Where is it? What's it for?" Lucy was still confused, but to the confusion was already mixed with wariness. And what are you going to do with the apartment after you're done with it? That's none of your business, said Betty sharply. By the way, baby, I suggest you pack up and vacate the apartment. Clear out? What do you mean, vacate? Where am I going? Lucy was indignant. It's not my problem. I put up with you for too long already. You are my sin, you are my punishment, and I have dragged you as long as I could. I'll be glad to be rid of you once and for all. This apartment will be mine, and I don't need you here at all. You'll be 18 in a couple of months, and I'll be lucky enough to be completely free of any responsibility to you. So why don't we just say goodbye now? A couple of months won't matter, will it? So Lucy found herself on the street. Her first thought was to go to Aunt Selena's, but she dismissed the idea immediately. It was impossible to imagine that she would live next door to her mother after everything that had happened. The girl went to her fellow students in the dormitory. Those, having heard her story, hid her from the commandant, stealing her student ID card from the watch. In the morning, they went to the curator, and then to the educational part. Lucy got a place in the dorm. A couple of weeks, however, had to hide at the girls', but then the bureaucratic machine finished its work, and the girl moved into the dormitory with full rights. Lucy studied, worked part-time, saved money for a rented apartment. Periodically, she called Aunt Selena and her grandmother's buddies, just to let them know she was okay. The conversations were short. The situation in the dormitory watch, where the phone was located, did not dispose to long conversations. After getting her diploma, Betty found a job, rented a small apartment not far from the office, and began to learn to live an adult life. A few months passed when she met Archie by chance on the street. Archie had dreamed of big money since he was a kid, but not because he wanted a super fancy car or a cottage with its own pool. No, he would not have refused those benefits that accompany wealth, but his main goal was quite different. Selena had raised him alone, and the boy had been accustomed from childhood to notice how hard his mother worked, how much she denied herself in order to provide her son not only with the necessities of life, but also with important boyish pleasures. When Archie was 12 years old, he solemnly promised his mother that when he grew up, she would not need anything, and he diligently fulfilled his promise as best he could. Archie started working part-time at 14, and in his 20s, after studying at the university and getting some acquaintances, he opened his own company for reselling and customizing computers. The business was slowly gaining momentum and began to bring profit. Even if not a big one yet, but Archie felt that he was on the right track. What ruined the boy was his lack of experience. Honest business in the late 90s was, in principle, already possible, but it required a lot of money. And to run a dishonest business, it was necessary to have certain knowledge and acquaintances, which the young entrepreneur did not have yet. Archie was caught forging documents in tax evasion. The firm was liquidated. He managed to save some money and some equipment, which gave him the opportunity to start the business again, albeit with a smaller scale. But the problem was that Archie was a wanted man. He couldn't show up at home or at any of his friends' houses. He couldn't cooperate with former partners or serve familiar customers. Worse, he couldn't register a business or a car or a rental agreement. He couldn't even register anywhere, because if he showed up anywhere, he would be instantly caught by the valiant police and put on trial. That wasn't part of the plan. For a week, he had been circling the city, sleeping in some random hotels, where they didn't ask for documents, or in the apartments of random guys he met in bars and at concerts, and agonizing over what to do now. And then he met Lucy. He hadn't seen the girl for almost 10 years, since she had moved away from her mother, and now he was sincerely glad to meet her. Lucy invited him to her house, listened to the story of his childhood pal's misadventures, and suggested, "Stay at my place for the present. No one will look for you here. I'm not on the list of your contacts of the last few years, and it's unlikely that anyone will dig up childhood acquaintances." Archie recognized that this was a logical argument and stayed, and as it turned out, he stayed forever. After a while, he and Lucy began to live as husband and wife. Archie even proposed to the girl, but immediately stipulated that he could not register the marriage right now. "In 10 years, when the statute of limitations expires and I will stop looking for me, then yes, maybe. If you agree to wait for me that long," he said. "I'll wait, I can't help it." Lucy smiled. "I've been waiting since I was a little girl. I'll be patient for 10 years. After some more time, Lucy opened the sole proprietorship and began to sell and customize computers with Archie. Her husband prompted her reliable suppliers, advised her how to communicate with each of the potential customers to lure them to the service, explained the subtleties of customs clearance of office equipment, himself selected from yesterday's students, programmers, and system administrators, who were then sent to customers to configure computers and automate their business. He himself drew up TOR on the basis of clients' explanations, wrote additions to 1C, designed databases and special software for the needs of customers. The only thing Lucy did not allow him to do was bookkeeping. That's where she stood her ground. "You've already messed it up once," she said. "Now leave the conduct of finances to a certified specialist." The two of them coped well with this life. Their firm soon grew and acquired several branches in the city and then in the region. The guys bought a spacious apartment, bought a country house and a car for Aunt Golly, and bought a nice car for themselves. Naturally, everything was written down on Lucia, down to the last spoon. Archie could not even get a bank card. Aunt Selena still periodically called the search and wondered if there was any news about his son. So Lucy Beatty had suddenly, by the time she was 30, grown a property and become a cool business lady. She did not diminish her merits in all this, but she was well aware that without Archie all this would not have happened, and repeatedly emphasized it. So Archie could not worry. The woman was not going to take advantage of her position and throw him out in the cold, leaving him without a dime or a place to live. He did not worry until Betty, his mother-in-law, appeared on his doorstep. Betty had spent most of her life with the brothers and sisters. The last few years, literally. She donated both of her apartments to the congregation and moved into a shared house where she has lived for the past few years with other parishioners. She was completely satisfied with this life. The new members of the congregation were responsible for all the household matters in the house, thus atoning for their sins with work. All the women's time was divided between work and serving their religion and fellowship with their brothers in faith. In addition, being in the common house allowed her to see Father Jack more often. Betty was calm and completely happy. But one day, Father Jack called her to his house and suddenly spoke to the woman about her daughter. Betty had no idea what had become of her. She thought she was completely rid of this sin of hers, and now had every right to live in tranquility and peace with herself and others. But that's not what Father Jack said. Her sin still exists, lives and thrives, and is about to multiply. And if she wanted to live the rest of her life in peace and tranquility, it was time to finally atone for that sin by doing something about it. "You can't just turn a blind eye to a sin," Father Jack said, "and think it doesn't exist anymore. If you stop paying attention to it, it will not disappear, it will not melt into thin air. On the contrary, it will be filled with power, and it will spread out into the world and fill it with itself. This is how your daughter acquires property, develops business, fills the city and region with herself and her business. The only way to stop it is to recognize that it exists and make it cease to exist." Betty listened and out of habit believed. Really, it was so simple. The solution had been lying on the surface for so many years, and she had not seen it. It seemed to her that the little girl would not survive without her mother's attention. She thought that a young girl with no friends and no money was bound to get into some kind of trouble, end up on the street, and disappear without a trace. She carefully turned a blind eye to her sin, but it was in her power to remove it completely, to remove it herself, by her own efforts. "You can't do it on your own," Father Jack said. "We have other people to do it. You need to believe that your sin exists, find out the details of its existence, and tell me so that I can prepare the ground for them." Father Jack, Jack Walker, never failed to keep tabs on the near and dear ones of his parishioners. Some he monitored closely and constantly. Others he requested information about once a year, or even in a few years. He first learned about Irina Siliverstova and her business about 5 years ago. All these years he had been watching the girl and the development of her company. Jack also kept an eye on her common-law husband, and finally, he decided that it was time to act. Logically, the young couple had reached the maximum in this city, and now should either change the sphere of activity, which could be fraught with losses, or move to a new, larger city, where it would be more difficult to get to them. It is a pity if such real estate, car, and most importantly, business, bringing a stable and solid income, will pass by. if there is an opportunity to seize them. All you have to do is get Betty in the right frame of mind. Explain to her that it is necessary to make peace with her daughter, to observe her for some time, and to find out how it is more convenient to kill her. Obviously, there's no way she's going to be allowed to do it herself. It must be made to look like an accident, and Betty, having no experience in such matters, would not be able to do it cleanly. If there is even the slightest suspicion that Lucy's death is criminal, one cannot guess for a long time whom the police will begin to suspect in the first place. Of course, the mother, the only legal heiress of the deceased, who disappeared unknown where more than 10 years and then suddenly appeared out of nowhere just before the tragedy. No, it's better not to take any chances, better to splurge on professionals. But the collection of information Beatty can be trusted, at least on this, to save money. The play, The Return of the Penitent Mother, went well. With tears in her eyes, Betty told how badly she was treated in the sect, how she was hypnotized and zombified, and how by an incredible effort of will she managed to get rid of this hypnosis. She blamed her daughter for mistreating her in her childhood and youth, for not being interested in her life, for kicking her out of the house. She apologized and begged her to accept her and try to start over. Lucy, of course, had collapsed and cried, and then, wiping away her tears, had gone to prepare a guest room for her mother. True, Betty had heard that her daughter's roommate was unhappy with this decision and even tried to change Lucy's mind. But where could he cope with the childish longing for her mother, which the abandoned girl had carried within her for so many years? Betty had no doubt that if Lucy believed her, no amount of the most fervent objections, no amount of the most reasonable and logical arguments would change her mind. And so it was. It took Betty several weeks to learn the habits and routines of the young family. Of course, she had to play up her sincere interest in the life of her daughter and her common-law husband, but the older woman could handle it. After all, her interest could really be called sincere to some extent, for Father Jack had told her to study her sin in as much detail as possible, not to turn away from it. And so Betty did. Lucy and Archie's family life was not exactly standard. Archie was almost always at home on his computer. He was either writing software on clients' orders or talking on the phone with the firm's branches in other cities, solving their problems, controlling their work, studying their reports. Lucy, on the other hand, left home early in the morning and returned in the evening. She managed all the company's business in their city and also worked with key clients. All day long, the young woman disappeared in her office or traveled to other people's offices. She traveled mostly by car and practically never walked. Grocery shopping and cooking, as well as most of the other household chores in the family, were handled by Archie. He could carve out time during the workday to run to the store and cook something unpretentious. Lucy cooked on Sundays. On Saturday, the young people traditionally went to Mama Selena's house in the country. Lucy mentioned to her mother that this was the name of her former neighbor in their house, but that Archie was Selena's son. She had no time to tell her. The young man, obeying more intuition than logic, quickly turned the conversation to another topic, and later asked Lucia, "Don't tell Betty yet that I am your former neighbor." "Why?" The girl wondered. "Do you think she'll turn you into the police?" "No, of course not." Archie smiled peacefully. "But she might tell about me somewhere, casually, for example, to some common old friend, without malice, just without thinking. But we can explain everything to Mama and ask her to keep your secret," Lucy tried to insist. Lucy, why bother Betty for nothing? For some reason, Archie was sure he would be better off incognito. Why, he couldn't explain, but how could an old woman, brought up in Soviet traditions, accept the fact that her daughter was living with a wanted criminal? She'll be worried sick, she'll worry about you, and she'll have a negative attitude towards me. Why disturb the peaceful atmosphere of the house and get on everyone's nerves? Lucy suddenly agreed with this argument, and later, Mama Selena supported Archie's position. It was true that neither Archie nor Selena had much faith that Betty could be disturbed by this information. Both of them suspected that the woman still didn't care about her daughter and was only using her as a tool to fix her own affairs. But neither mother nor son voiced their suspicions aloud. Lucy had suggested to her mother that she go with them to visit Selena, but Betty had refused each time. She said she was embarrassed to meet a neighbor with whom she had been less than polite. In the future, she would, but for now, she wasn't ready. In fact, Betty took the opportunity to be alone in the empty apartment and explore it properly. She quickly found her daughter's main documents and studied them carefully. She looked through all the cupboards and boxes and made a small inventory of the family's jewelry. Surprisingly, there were few of them, though Betty had expected that Lucy, having begun to receive substantial sums of money after an almost poverty-stricken childhood, would go on a lavish spending spree. But it turned out that her daughter was not at all interested in gold or diamonds. The young people had a good closet, modern appliances, cool computers. However, their value Betty could not estimate. A good fresh car, but she couldn't find any signs of luxury. However, in the wall of Sashka's office, she found a cunningly hidden safe, the contents of which she still remained unknown. Perhaps the main valuables were kept there. From Betty's point of view, it would be reasonable. When she was alone, she would call Father Jack and talk to him for long periods of time. On weekdays, it was impossible. The house phone was always busy with Archie, and the street phones were not suitable for the kind of conversations the rector and the parishioner were having. Betty gave Jack Walker all the information she had gleaned, discussed future plans, and of course, received spiritual counsel. Without regular meetings at the brothers and sisters, it was hard for her to keep her spirits up. But Jack tried to support her as best he could. Betty urged him to deal with Lucy quickly, suggested a car accident on the way out of the office, but Jack's father was not satisfied with that. It seemed to him too unreliable and risky for the executors. It was easy to spotlight a car that would be instantly found by license plate number and characteristic damage, and it would be very easy to damage the driver of that car. Jack couldn't take that risk, and eventually the conspirators managed to devise another plan. Lucy only walked to two places, a sports club and a beauty parlor. Both of them were 15 minutes walk from home, and it seemed unreasonable for her to take a car for such a distance. She visited the sports club twice a week and the beauty salon weekly. Usually it was in the evenings, after Lucy returned from work. On one such evening, a young woman returning from a training session was hit by a car. It was nearing fall. It was getting dark early enough that there were few passersby on the street. And those who were could not remember either the make or the number of the dark, unattractive car that suddenly flew out onto the sidewalk, hit the girl with the hood, ran her over and disappeared around the corner. Actually, there were only two witnesses, young boys, yesterday's school children. One of them immediately rushed to Lucy, the other rushed to the machine to call an ambulance. They just ignored the car. The car was found a couple of days later in one of the neighboring alleys, with a couple of doses of cocaine in the glove compartment and traces of track on the dashboard. The car had been reported stolen and had apparently been abandoned by the carjacker, who had been frightened by a drug-induced murder he had committed. At least, that's what the operatives on Lucy's case decided. A typical case, no need to look for criminals, it's all for nothing. That's exactly what Jack Walker was counting on. A few days after Lucy's funeral, Betty approached Archie. "Sasha, where do you keep the documents?" "What papers?" The guy didn't understand. "Well, for the apartment, for the car," explained Betty, not the least bit embarrassed. "I'll have to formalize the inheritance." Archie realized he was in trouble. He could have realized it earlier, but the grief after Lucy's death was too strong, and the guy could not think straight. But then it was as if his brain had turned on. "Betty, it was 6 months before that," Archie wondered. "So what?" "I've got to get ready. See if I need to call a technician to the apartment, update the paperwork, check which banks Lucy had accounts with, make inquiries. I also need to find out how the business is inherited. I don't know anything about it yet. I need to consult," Betty said calmly and businesslike, without any embarrassment. "I understand it was all in Lucy's name, and I'm the sole heiress, so I'm the one to deal with it. I'm an old woman and it'll be 6 months before I've been through all the authorities and consulted." "Betty." Archie was agonizing over what to do next, and at the same time he tried very hard not to show the indignation that was boiling up in him. Look at her, 9 days after Lucy's death, and she's already going after the inheritance. "Betty, of course, you are the sole heiress by law," he confirmed, "but you realize that all this, the apartment, the firm, the car, all of it, Lucy and I have gained together. It's my labor, my time, my strength. So I think I'm entitled to a share of the property. I suggest you give me the firm. It would be impossible for you to run it anyway. and you can have the rest. It's only fair. What firm? What inheritance? How will you formalize it on yourself, you idiot? Ran through Archie's head. You'll be caught instantly. You're still under the statute of limitations. But the man decided to deal with problems as they arose. First, it was necessary to defend his honestly gained property from the sudden competitor, and then to think how this honestly gained property could be relatively honestly formalized. I've seen how you profited. Betty grinned sarcastically. Lucy worked like a horse, and you sat at home, playing on the computer and talking on the phone. It's not much of a job. And anyway, if you're so fair, why did you live with Lucy without registration for so many years? If you'd signed a marriage license, you'd be the first in line here now too. We'd split everything in half and be done with it. No, you were cheating. You didn't want to commit yourself. Now you're sitting there cooing. Archie choked with indignation. There was nothing to say. He hadn't intended to tell Leon about the true reason for his and Lucy's cohabitation before, but now he thought it was simply dangerous. Explaining to her what part of the work he, Archie, was doing for her and Lucy's business was simply not possible. He had to think of something else, but he wasn't ready to think now. Legally, of course, you're right, Betty, he repeated, and I can't argue with that. May I ask you a favor? Betty raised her eyebrow questioningly. Could I stay in this apartment for a while? Until the inheritance is finalized, you and I are both on a bird's-eye basis. But you'll get this place afterward, and I have nowhere to go. I'll try to earn money for a new corner as soon as possible, and I won't bother you too much. Archie spoke so heartily and modestly that Betty suddenly felt sorry for the lad. Really, she thought, he's got nowhere to go. He's just been through a great grief. Let him live. What's the use? And I'll need some more information from him. Lie, she nodded regally. If you'll still go shopping for groceries and cooking, you can live for the whole 6 months. It won't be a pity. Archie shone and rushed to thank the old woman. A few days after the explanation with the failed son-in-law, Betty woke up in the middle of the night. Footsteps were clearly audible in the room. Archie, the bastard, thought the woman. No other way than to strangle me in my sleep, or some other mischief. Well, I'll give it to him. She opened her eyes. A street lamp was shining outside the window, illuminating the bedroom, not too brightly, but enough to make sure the room was empty. I was dreaming, Betty thought, but the footsteps sounded again. Silent at first, as if from far away, they grew louder and louder, more and more distinct, and finally came to a halt beside her bed. Almost above the woman's ear, someone's breath rustled. Betty froze under the covers and squeezed her eyes tightly shut. "Mommy," said a quiet female voice. "Mommy." Betty flinched and suddenly remembered the lamp above the bed. Abruptly, she flicked the switch and the space around the bed was illuminated. It was empty. What the hell? But a heavy sigh sounded above her ear, and then familiar footsteps rustled toward the window. The curtain swayed slightly, as if from an occasional draft, and the room was silent. Since that night, Betty had lost her peace. She kept seeing footsteps in the apartment, first at night and then during the day. Sometimes they sounded beside her, and sometimes they came from the empty bedroom or the kitchen. Once, when she couldn't stand it, the woman even dragged Archie into the empty room and started to convince him that someone was walking in it. The man looked sympathetically, assured her he couldn't hear anything, and advised some kind of sedative. But Betty knew her sin had taken hold. Lucy would not leave her. She would stay by her side even in death, and there was no way to fight it. During the day, the invisible guest simply walked around the rooms. But at night, she walked around Betty's bedroom, approached her bed, and quietly called, "Mama," and even the lamp, which the woman did not put out until morning, could not deter her. The obsessions haunted the woman not only in the apartment. During walks, she suddenly began to hear her daughter's name constantly. "Lucy," shouted a girl under the window, calling her girlfriend Lucy. Exclaimed a guy with a stunted bouquet, rushing to meet the girl. "Lucy," sternly said the woman to her little daughter, pulling her away from the puddle. And on the signs of various salons, stores, and kiosks, the name of Lucy was repeatedly flashed. It was amazing how Betty had never noticed it before. One day she was passing by a stranger's house with a radio playing loudly through the windows. Suddenly, in the middle of a song, a tender child's voice sounded. A little girl was repeating over and over again, I forgive you. I love you. I forgive you. I love you. Lucy had said the same thing, almost with the same intonation, when she came to make up with her mother after a scandal. Betty couldn't take it anymore. She called Father Jack from the payphone and, almost sobbing into the receiver, told him of her obsessions. The abbot listened to her attentively, then calmed her down for a long time and exhorted her to be patient, to pull herself together, not to pay attention, not to get worked up, not to believe in otherworldly nonsense. But this time the conversation with Father Jack did not help Betty. In her head, interrupting the voice of the man pouring from the tube, sang a child's voice, repeating two simple phrases. She returned home completely shattered. Archie, seeing the woman's condition, was seriously concerned. He almost forced her to take some drops, put her to bed, and promised that she would sleep through the morning. But it was not to be. Betty did fall asleep almost as soon as her head touched the pillow. But in the middle of the night, she awoke suddenly as if she had been struck. The lamp overhead was not lighted. She had gone to bed in the daytime, and Archie, of course, had not thought to turn it on. But the light of the lantern outside the window was enough to see a slender female silhouette against the curtains. A girl in a white robe, with loose blonde hair covering her face, stood at the windowsill and whispered softly, "Mommy." Noticing that Betty had opened her eyes, she slowly moved toward her. The sound of footsteps was painfully familiar. The girl stopped at the bedside and reached out her hand toward Betty's face. The hand reeked of icy coldness. Betty screamed and lost consciousness. She woke up to Archie shaking her by the shoulders. The light was on in the room, and the boy was standing over the bed in his underwear, disheveled, sleepy, and obviously frightened. "Betty, oh, thank God you're awake. What happened? You were screaming so much, it scared the shit out of me. Shit, I gave you a good sleeping pill. You should have slept till morning." The woman suddenly cried, and then told Archie everything. He shook his head sympathetically, dragged Betty into the kitchen for tea, offered her valerian and some more serious sedatives from the stockpile. He didn't question her words like Father Jack had, didn't say it was all nonsense and nonsense. He even envied her a little, because he didn't get to see the woman he loved after death. He looked down at her and seemed to brush away an invisible tear, and that suddenly made Betty even more attracted to the boy. They sat in the kitchen until dawn. It was only at first light that the woman finally decided to go back to bed. Over the next few days, she felt better. The presence of the ghost during the day was still manageable. In the evenings, she took sedatives, and Archie sat by her side until she fell asleep. He had been very attentive since their conversation, treating her as gently as a fragile Christmas toy and caring for her in every way he could. Betty thought it was a good thing she hadn't sent the boy away right away. Without him, it would have been much harder to deal with all this mysticism. She wouldn't have been able to stand it. A few days later, Archie suddenly said, "Betty, I'm probably going to say something stupid. But you know, my grandmother used to tell me when I was a kid that the dead don't just come to us, the living. They bother us because they have some business here on earth, some request for us. Next time you ask Lucy what she wants, maybe she'll tell you and you'll do as she asks and she won't bother you anymore." "Superstition," said Betty angrily, "though, you know, Archie, I might try it. If I don't freak out," she added, and went to bed. The otherworldly visitor came to her about 24 hours later. On a white day, by the way, though it was close to evening, but it was still daylight. These ghosts have got the nerve. When she heard the familiar footsteps behind her in the empty room, she pulled herself together and asked, trying to keep her voice as gentle as possible, "Lucy, my daughter, what are you walking about for? Why don't you lie still? What do you want?" "Mama." A quiet whisper spread through the room. "Mama. Fence. White one is needed, Mama. White fence. Bad with black one, Mama." The whisper came nearer and seemed to sound just above the woman's ear. Betty turned sharply, and immediately she heard a rustle, and a light draught touched her face. The footsteps receded toward the window. The quiet voice repeated the request for a fence once more and fell silent with them. Betty became excited. A hedge, a fence, hell, was it really that simple? Had she been going crazy for over a month over such a small thing? Just repaint the fence and her daughter would calm down and this nightmare would be over. "Archie," she shouted for joy. "Archie, have you got any white paint in the house?" There was no paint in the house. A trip to the store had to wait until morning. Betty had chosen the strongest and whitest enamel, and a couple of consultants had been almost hysterical. Along with the paint, she bought gloves, a brush, solvent, a rag to wipe the cemetery metal with solvent, sandpaper. Having chosen the paint, she listened to all the advice of the salesman about additional equipment. The woman could not imagine that something would go wrong. She would not be able to finish the work today, and her daughter would disturb her again. It was necessary to be fully insured. The bag was heavy, and she had to call a cab to the cemetery. The driver squinted perplexedly at the passenger, and he had never seen a woman go to the cemetery with an expression of joyful enthusiasm on her face. But Betty did not notice the slanting glances. From the gate to Lucy's grave, she walked almost at a run, and only when she finally came to the unfortunate fence was she able to catch her breath. Lucy was buried next to Barbara. They didn't put up a monument yet. It was too early. The earth would settle, and then they'd have to fix it anyway. But the fence on the plot was renewed. Earlier, Barbara's grave was surrounded by simple metal posts with chains stretched between them, and now there was a wrought iron openwork construction. But the old fence was really white, and the new one was painted bronze. No other way did Grandma Lucy put it up to put it back the way it was, thought Betty irritably, and she was not even surprised at her thoughts. She had always been a materialist, and even membership in the Brothers and Sisters could not change that. The woman believed in the doctrine of sin and purification, but she considered the stories about the afterlife, the kingdom of God, the eternal life of the soul, and other such things to be superstition and nonsense. It took only a month of contact with the other world to abandon her materialistic view of the world and take the supernatural for granted. Betty pulled on her gloves and got to work. She shoveled away small debris and attacking foxes from the graves, wiped the unfortunate fence with a damp rag, went over it with a metal brush, then brushed away the dust with a soft brush. Preparing to degrease the surface with solvent and take up a brush, she suddenly heard strange sounds coming from her daughter's grave. The woman listened, then cautiously approached closer. The sound was clearly coming from under a pile of wreaths. She carefully pushed the green ruffles aside, and then, frightened and at the same time strangely mesmerized by the incomprehensible noise, scattered them to the sides without any respect. There was nothing under the wreaths, but the noise had clearly increased. It seemed to be coming from beneath the ground. "I'd had enough of you, you bastard," said Betty, turning to her daughter. "I come to paint your fence. Can't you bear it? Stay down and don't make any noise." From the grave again came incomprehensible sounds. "Damn you," said Betty, getting more and more angry. "I'm going to dig you up and strangle you with my own hands, just to be sure." With these words, the woman came close to the mound and leaned over it, listening. And then she began to rake furiously with her hands the earth, which had not yet compacted too much. It must have looked wild from the outside, but Betty didn't care. It didn't take long, though. Her hand came across something hard, and she grasped it, pulled it toward her, and pulled it out of the ground, stunned, and then with a heavy groan sank down on the dead grass. In her hand lay a portable audio speaker wrapped in polyethylene, from which came some inarticulate wheezing. The speaker was familiar, just like the one on Archie's desk. Archie, sitting in the bushes by the neighboring memorial that guarded the peace of several generations of a large family, cursed quietly. "I should have gotten out earlier when she started tossing wreaths," he belatedly thought. But the sight of an elderly woman ravaging her own daughter's grave so startled him that he let the moment pass. And lo and behold, Betty had found the column. Just a couple more seconds and she'd figure it all out. "To hell with it. Let's go surrender," muttered Archie and stepped resolutely from his hiding place. "Betty, I'm sorry, I meant well. I didn't think you'd be so scared," mumbled the boy, embarrassed. "Did you arrange all this?" Betty asked, stunned. "I hit the speaker, yes." Archie repented. "I have it with a remote and a flash drive. I meant well, really. I recorded that song you were talking about, and I thought I'd play it when you're working here. And you'll think Lucy's forgiven you, and you'll be relieved." "What song?" Betty couldn't get over it. "Well, you said you heard it on the radio. I'll put it on now," Archie realized, and took the player out of his pocket. Muttering, just a minute," he found the track he wanted, put the headphones in the older woman's ears and pressed play. A male voice sang something Betty thought was rambling but rhythmic. She wanted to take the headphones out, but Archie made signs that said listen, and at the end of the tape, a child's voice suddenly came on. I forgive you, I love you, I forgive you, I love you. So it was just a song. Betty listened to the voice and couldn't believe it. Wait, but what about the rest of it? The voices, the footsteps, the breathing, the names, and then she came to me, herself, Lucy. Betty tried painfully to think, but her thoughts were jumbled and wouldn't cohere. You didn't believe me, did you? She exclaimed, feeling the anger boiling up inside her. You decided to deceive me, to make fun of the old woman then. She sprang up from the ground with sudden impetuosity and lunged at Archie with her fists. But she stopped a step away from him and began to lurch slowly to the side. Her face was strangely twisted, and instead of an accusing cry, her mouth was a frightening wheeze, like that unfortunate speaker. Betty collapsed next to the fence and passed out. Archie leaned over the woman, felt for a pulse, and swore, now in a full voice. Then he pulled a cell phone out of his jacket pocket, huge as a brick and terribly uncomfortable. He didn't like it, but now he was glad he brought it with him. Mom, he said quickly into the phone, get behind the wheel and drive to the cemetery to see Lucy. Quickly, I'll explain later. Yes, don't drive in from the main gate, but from the side entrance, so the guard won't see you. Archie worked out his plan with his mother. Selena suggested that Betty should be easily suggestible and mystical, since she was in a cult. So Archie began to entertain. He placed several small but powerful speakers around the house, through which he broadcast the sounds of footsteps, breathing, whispers. He controlled the recordings with a remote control or put them on a timer, so as not to be too monotonous, and it would be suspicious if the ghost only appeared to Betty when Archie was home. The guy kept track of Betty's walks, and on her way back he coaxed passersby to say Lucy's name next to the woman. Some he'd tell about a prank for his favorite aunt. Others he'd bribe with a little money. He turned on the song with the words that he knew from her stories that Lucy had repeated to her mother like an incantation all of her childhood, lurking in the bushes near the house that Betty had passed. His speakers were powerful enough. The ghost was Celine's mom, dressed in a white hoodie and a blonde wig. They had calculated that after the sleeping pills Archie had given his mother-in-law, she wouldn't look at the details, and they had calculated correctly. The Barbaricans weren't planning anything bad. They wanted to convince Betty in the existence of the ghost, and then his mouth to command her to share with Archie inheritance. But things turned out differently. Exhausted by worry, by the need to lie and pretend again, by the separation from the brothers and sisters and the beloved rector, by the participation in the murder, albeit indirectly, by otherworldly entities, in short, by all the events of the past months, Betty suffered a stroke. She collapsed in the cemetery, and neither Archie nor Selena ever found out if the woman had figured out what it was really like. After calling Selena, Archie used his cell phone to call an ambulance. The doctors arrived on time, but thankfully still 5 minutes later than his mother. He had time to explain the situation to Selena, and he bushwhacked off to his car and left for her house. Selena, on the other hand, went to the hospital with Betty and cared for her in the intensive care unit for over a month. The ward was not allowed outsiders, but there was not enough staff, and another paralyzed old woman nobody was happy, so when Selena asked to help, she was allowed. A month later, she also moved Betty home to an apartment. The woman was still half paralyzed and unable to speak, but she promised to live a long time. Archie equipped the room with the peculiarities of the bedridden patients, hired a nurse. Together with his mother, they attacked the guardianship authorities, some by phone, Selena in person. Betty had no relatives, but there were witnesses who confirmed their long acquaintance, neighborhood, close communication with Selena. This circumstance, plus a little money, and Selena Babarikina officially became the guardian of Betty Silverstova, her former neighbor and failed sister-in-law. On the rights of guardian, Selena received the right to dispose of the inheritance due to Betty. She signed over the firm to herself, and Archie found an executive director who ran the business for several years. Naturally, none of the director's actions were without consultation with Archie. When the statute of limitations on his previous offenses ran out, Archie officially stepped in as director himself. Betty lived only 2 years after her stroke. Jack Walker, having lost contact with her, tried to track her down, but when he found her, he decided to remove himself from his former parishioner. Betty herself did not think anything. Next to her was Selena, who was busy with the guardianship. To the rich inheritance of his father, Jack was not to get close, and he preferred to forget about Betty as a failed project. And soon the activities of the Society Brothers and Sisters was interested in the prosecutor's office, and Jack Walker had other concerns. Celebrating his 45th birthday, Archie thought with satisfaction that all the same managed to fulfill the promise once made to his mother. Selena did not need anything, and Archie was sincerely proud of it. And in general, life had turned out well, except that he'd never had a family. After Lucy, all women seemed unsuitable for him to live together. A big photo portrait of her hung on the wall in his office for years, and on the girl's grave was a monument of pink marble, surrounded by an open-work white fence. Barry sat at his desk. Everything around him was exactly the same as usual. Nothing around him had changed, only his life, which could not return to normal. He always had some conflicts with his wife, some endless conflicts. They fought, made up, fought again, and the whole epic could go on forever. "You're very gloomy today," said a colleague, looking at him. "Yes, there are a lot of problems, so no wonder I'm in such a state," said the man, shaking his head negatively. Barry put his hands on the desk, putting his head down on his hands. He looked frustrated, and besides, he had plenty of reasons to lose his mood lately. The co-worker who sat next to him patted him on the back. He didn't say anything at first, and then apparently, he realized that he couldn't help him morally. He decided not to push too hard. "Yeah, my wife and I fight all the time. Lately, she's turned into some kind of meter. I don't know what she wants. She always has some problems, conflicts, can't decide whether she needs me as a husband or not," said Barry, shrugging his shoulders. Lately, there were so many difficult cases, so many challenges, that he felt so frustrated that he didn't want to do anything. And instead of coming home, lying on the couch, relaxing, he had to endure constant attacks from his wife. She then talked about something that wants more money there, then wants him to spend more time at home, and such contradictions could accompany her just in any matter. "Well, you do not get upset. Just you have that right. Some crisis in the relationship so happens. I too, at one time with mine, so much quarreled that I thought that we already divorced. Well, as you can see, we're still together, and besides, we're good," said the co-worker, smiled, but the smile slowly slipped off his face. "If we were just fighting, it would be one thing, but we're fighting forever, like like we're strangers to each other," said Barry. "I sometimes feel like she has only one goal, just to drive me to the edge. That's it. It's like she's setting this whole thing up on purpose, and it's all just to come to some goal of her own. I do everything for the family. I do everything for her, and she always can't get enough. Maybe she's really right that it's time for us to get a divorce," Barry asked, shrugging his shoulders. Now it was his co-worker who was shrugging his shoulders. He couldn't give such advice. He couldn't afford to give advice that could ruin the family or affect it in any negative way. "Well, let's put it this way. You talk to her. Maybe you'll be fine." "Really, what's the problem with just talking? Maybe she has some real grievances with you. Questions maybe she wants to discuss something with you, and you are at work. You don't hear I had that with my wife. We talked. We ended up discussing, and I got a little better. It's all good now. We have to talk to each other. There's no other way," said the man, smiled, and patted his colleague on the shoulder. Barry suddenly thought that he talked too much, but these conversations lead to absolutely nothing. Always some problem. Always she has some dissatisfaction. She was so tired of it. Barry was getting a little tired of it too. And he looked at her. Sometimes it seemed to him that he did not understand whether it was his wife, whether he did the right thing when he chose her. "I guess we do need to talk, but about whether we should get a divorce. But she doesn't want to talk about it. She wants me to figure it out right away. It's like I'm a magician. I don't know what she wants. Every day there's a new complaint. You think I'm married for the first day, and all I see is that she needs to break up with me as soon as possible. She's either got a lover or plans. She doesn't want to be with me. Here's a cross for you," said Barry, leaning back in his desk chair. "Even if you get divorced, will it really hit you that hard?" asked his colleague, and his question was inappropriate. In fact, Barry thought that the divorce would not hit him so hard, and in general, most likely, everything would be fine. Yes, he would be a little upset at first. There would be problems, but then gradually things would get better. Barry was smiling, looking as if he could make mountains out of everything. It was a different look from a couple minutes ago, and it was noticeable that he was having a hard time with this whole conversation. Barry sat at his desk, his co-worker sitting across from him. Periodically, they talked or laughed, and the chuckles seemed to become endless. Barry was a little distracted, and it helped him come to his senses. But look, what's to come is what's to go. You realize that if she wants a divorce, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't force a favor, as they say, said the colleague, shrugging his shoulders. That's understandable, said Barry, waving it off, pretending to understand. It's just that I'm very tired. I want to come home and feel rested. You know how much work we have to do these days. I'm always in some sort of endless state of nervousness. All I do is clean up other people's messes. I came in yesterday, I said, let's have a little quiet time. And you know what she did, word for word. She made a scene. You see, she's not satisfied with my work. Barry snorted. I mean, I've worked hard for years. I've worked hard, and she's just not satisfied. I've been working towards my dream job for years. She just said she's not satisfied. If it's not hers, it's not hers. Barry was so indignant he didn't realize he'd overreached himself. He exhaled noisily and leaned back in his desk chair again. Joe, who was sitting across from him, had just smiled visibly. Now only his smile was a guilty one. He wouldn't have been able to tolerate such a thing himself. Yes, he and his wife had misunderstandings, but not like this at all. If his wife was throwing tantrums at home to get him to change the job he loved so much, she would very quickly stop being his wife. Okay, let's get to work, said the co-worker, smiling. Barry was in agreement. He pulled out the stack of cases he needed to review and felt there were no urges today. He smiled at his own thoughts. How long would he be sitting here? How long would it take him to get promoted? Of course, at this rate, if his wife kept pushing him, if she kept ruining his mood, he certainly wouldn't be able to do anything. And he needed to solve a case, needed to prove himself, otherwise he'd be stuck in this department. The biggest thing that frustrated Barry was being stuck here. He was already thinking that a divorce could solve this problem. He was running that thought through his head, hoping that it would be completely warm. As the saying goes, ready he would be able to make up his mind and be able to do whatever it took to not worry anymore. But once he remembered the first days they had, he couldn't give up on her anymore. He remembered how gentle, attentive, caring she had been. What had happened so much in attitude that she had turned into such a monster where he took a wrong turn? So today he approached the house, but he didn't feel like going in. He knew that as soon as he entered the apartment, again there would be endless problems. Again she would tell him how displeased she was. He walked up the stairs, entered the apartment, looked at his wife. She smiled at him. Casey looked like she was quite calm. She was chubby, pretty, very interesting. She had some kind of zest in her looks. She caught the eye. Barry remembered looking at her and instantly falling in love. He couldn't tear his gaze away. She was so beautiful, so wonderful. In fact, it was still like that. Maybe he had grown cold to her, why he had not considered the problem from this side. Maybe it was his fault that because of his work he could not in time trace where their love ended. And so, as he found himself back in the kitchen, showering, tidying himself up, he pondered over which one of them was more to blame for the relationship absolutely evaporating. He immediately thought back to his ex. Maybe he should have stayed in that relationship. Maybe he should have slowed down a little bit, not to push Annabelle then. Hey, how's work going? She asked. She wanted to show interest, but it was obvious she wasn't interested at all. It's fine, just a lot of work. We've been under a lot of pressure lately, but I think it's for the best. Maybe we can really get a promotion. When he brought up the promotion again, she rolled her eyes. She didn't like it when he started talking like he was going to be in this job forever. She turned to him, crossing her arms over her chest. You think you really need a promotion in this job? That more killers, more thieves, but less time with your family is what you're dreaming of. Now it was Barry's turn to roll his eyes. He didn't like it when she started proving him wrong in his reasoning. She just wanted to prove to him that he should listen to her own reasoning, as if her opinion was the only one that made sense. By the way, she herself didn't work at all. Then why all this talk? And what do you want me to quit? To go handyman? He asked, trying to keep himself in control. And what do we have? Dispersal only from police officer to handyman. What? Business cannot open their own. Casey asked, crossing her arms over her chest. I think you have some kind of disease. What do you call a disease when a person sees only business in front of him and everything else as if it doesn't exist? I think it's called mercantilism, isn't it? I've worked my whole life to make myself comfortable. I've worked so hard to get to this position, and you're telling me I have to quit my job just to please you? Barry asked. He suddenly stretched, sniffing. I think it smacks of selfishness. Casey threw the rag down in anger. She couldn't stand it when he sneered like that. He looked at her, but didn't say anything. He looked annoyed. That meant only one thing, that she was going to reprimand him again. Well, I just want a normal, strong family, and I'm immediately selfish, so I want to go to the seaside at least once a year. Am I selfish? You are selfish that you deprive us of all this just to sit at your job and sit in your office, she said rather harshly. He felt that at times like this he was much more angry with her than before. The girl was silent, but Barry knew it was a temporary silence. Now she would think for a while, and then she would utter another pearl that he had heard a dozen times before. You never listened to me, by the way. Lucy's husband opened his own business and now they have money to spare. Why can't I have a nice life? Why should I sit and wait for life to get better while others live to the fullest? She was indignant. Again, comparisons began again. I couldn't stand that she started to put someone as an example again. Well, so maybe you can find another husband such as your Lucy. You will then sit together, discuss what your husbands are wonderful, opens its own business, beauty. He asked his wife unhappily, and she grimaced even more at his words. He didn't understand what she was missing. She didn't work. She was only occupied with herself. She had everything she asked for, and she wasn't satisfied with everything again. He was starting to get angry, and it seemed like he was doing everything for her, and she was just starting to screw him over even more. Casey had gone into the other room. He knew she was about to definitely pick up the phone, start calling her friend, and again they would have a conversation that consisted solely of discussing him as a terrible husband. But contrary to his notions, Casey came back into the kitchen, sat down across from him and defiantly took a deep breath in and then an exhale, as if she was overwhelmed with emotion she was trying to contain. Do you want us to divorce you? He asked, and she was taken aback. Apparently, she hadn't expected him to bring it up at all. She stared at him silently, her mouth slightly open in surprise, but she couldn't shake off her stupor. Barry realized he'd just caught her off guard. Maybe she wanted to use the divorce to threaten him, to use that damn manipulation again. Or maybe she wanted to pull it off on purpose to make him feel guilty. But he went all in. He brought up the divorce first. What makes you think I need a divorce? She asked, but it was clear from her voice that it was not what she wanted to talk about. But you're acting like the last person in the world. You know how much I work, and yet you throw tantrums at me at home. You know how hard I worked to get this job. You knew it was my dream job, and every day you tyrannize me into quitting. Aren't you doing this so I'm the first one to talk about divorce? You're taking the burden of responsibility off of yourself, and then you're going to tell me how bad I am, and that's the end of it. When the key turned in the lock, he knew right away it was Casey's mother coming in. He hated it when she showed up unannounced, hated it when she always showed up and started acting like she was in her own house. But Casey had given her the keys herself, apparently wanting her mom to be there for her. Their conversation stopped temporarily. You could see by the look on Casey's face that she was relieved about it. Apparently, she wanted to put it off until she could come up with some new excuse, or until she decided to talk to him herself about the divorce or the fact that she wanted a completely different life. When the older woman entered the apartment, her face was disgruntled. She looked at her daughter, clucked her tongue, and said that she was always unhappy with everything here, and that she obviously didn't want to talk about it right now. You have a heavy energy here. You always have it like this, as if I don't come here is always bad energy, as if you fight every day, said the older woman, entering the kitchen. Nanny, why did you come here? Barry asked. He didn't know how to get the woman out of his own apartment. I came to check on my daughter, and I can't check on my daughter, or do I have to ask permission every time? That's a lot of hospitality you got here, that's for sure. That's why you always have money problems, because you don't make guests happy," said the old woman. Barry just got up and went into the bedroom. He didn't want to talk to her now. He didn't want to say anything. He was so tired of the constant complaints that he didn't want to talk to his wife or her mother. He didn't want again to listen to how bad he was, how wonderful she was. Thank you. He already listens to it all the time from his wife, and now he had to listen to it from her mother. Why is he going off the rails again? The woman asked her daughter. It's a work problem. I have his work is already in my liver, and why the hell does he cling to it so much, clinging to this job, as if there is no other? Casey said in a disgruntled voice. She tried to keep her voice down, knowing that loud talking would be heard in the bedroom, but apparently her mother wasn't stopping that. Look, come on, your family. You, a woman, should act wisely, somehow adjust to him. I mean, really, anyone would run away if they had to be brainwashed around the clock. You grew up just like your father, and you never realized that this will not lead to good. The old woman only shook her head negatively. She looked at her daughter, hoping she'd get the message, but Casey only snorted. She certainly wasn't going to adjust to her husband, at least not now that he was making such a big deal out of things she wasn't happy with. Look, Casey, if he leaves you, you'll be biting your elbows, said the old woman. Mom, you make it sound like he's the only man in the world, said Casey, looking at her mother with a tired look. Fool, think what you're saying. He works. He doesn't drink. He doesn't go out with friends. He doesn't go out with women. He's a good man. Why are you turning your nose up? Asked the old woman. You can't find such a man nowadays. Some men work, others drink, and the third one does just as well. Casey looked at her mother, but there was more judgment than understanding in her gaze. Casey certainly didn't think so. She had her own way of looking at things, and she scoffed at her mother's desire for her to be involved in family reconciliations as much as possible. Casey, for her part, felt that her husband should be the first to go to the reconciliation. She, like a girl, should sit and wait for him to take the initiative. Look, Katia, it'll be too late. You won't be able to do anything. He's a good man. He'll be ripped off. You shouldn't treat him like that. Well, he works at this job. What now? If you don't have enough money, try to get a job yourself first, her mother said in a disgruntled voice. She knew very well that her daughter didn't want to work. You've got a good job. Your man provides for you from head to toe, doesn't drive you to work, and you turn your nose up at the fact that you're not satisfied with his work. Casey sat down across from her mother and took her hands. She looked her mother in the eye. Mom, you don't understand. You're at that age. But I don't know how you don't understand. I want a different life. I'm tired. I'm always at home and I can't afford anything. My girlfriends live a different life. I go to the mall and buy whatever I want. I went to the salon, changed my hairstyle, and grew my hair. I went to the salon and bought myself a new cell phone or an expensive necklace, said the girl, rolling her eyes. I also want to afford everything. Look at me. I'm young, beautiful. I can have it all. And instead, I'm just sitting around, waiting for things to get better, for him to decide I'm worthy of this new life, you see, said Casey. The mother looked at her daughter with undisguised doubt, as if she was trying to figure out if her daughter meant what she said, or if she was just pretending once again that she was the princess and the rest of us should indulge her whims. Family's supposed to be about family, not money. But since you're so smart, go ahead and sit on some man who'll provide for you. And what do you think you'll be happy in this golden cage? No, my dear, life is very complicated. You need to choose a man with whom you can walk through life by the hand, with whom you are not afraid, who will always be near, who will not deceive and will not betray. You have such a wonderful husband. I would sell my soul for such a man, but you do nothing but complain, said the mother. Banging her fist on the table, she suddenly took out her keys and put them on the table. The woman got up and walked towards the exit. The daughter watched her mother's actions carefully, but she wasn't going to stop her. If she wanted to leave, let her leave, and when the woman left, there was total silence in the apartment. Casey took a full breath. Finally, her mother was gone. The next day when Barry arrived at work, he was in such a broken mood that words were hard to convey. He was upset not only after his conversation with his wife, but after everything he had heard. He hadn't closed the door. The bedroom had heard perfectly well the conversation between Casey and Nanny. He was glad that older woman had finally left the keys to the apartment, but he could see that there was little to stop his wife anymore. Apparently, Casey was going to look for a suitable suitor who would be worthy of her understanding, who could give her everything, provide for her from head to toe, and make no demands in return. "Barry on call," said the tall woman, pointing toward the car. "Sydney, what a call. I don't go on calls anymore," said Barry, and a strange smile appeared on his face. On the one hand, he realized that he was contradicting his superiors, but on the other hand, he felt a kind of pleasure that he was no longer in that position when he had to be on call around the clock. "Did I make you an offer? Let's make it quick." A neighbor complains that her stepfather is beating a little girl, and she's screaming like she's being murdered. "We don't have people here, and it looks like the girl doesn't have time to wait. The car is already parked," quickly said the supervisor. Barry did not argue. He and his colleague went down the stairs and got into the car, and they drove to the call. "From the look on your face, the situation in your house has not gotten any better," the colleague said, looking at him with a look of disappointment rather than support. He hoped that after talking to him, the friend would finally talk to his wife. Maybe they could find common ground, could get a little closer to a solution. But compromise was too far away. "Yesterday, my mother-in-law came to visit. She kept saying that she was coming here because the energy here was bad, and my fool declared that she wanted a secure life. You see, she's not satisfied with my job. She doesn't work at all. I didn't say a word to her when she said she didn't want to work. I took extra shifts. I took the guys for training. Here you are. She wants more money. She is like that monster who eats and is not enough," he said, and felt a little ashamed of himself for talking about his wife like that. The friend only shook his head negatively. He knew that in such a situation it was unlikely that anything could be solved. It was already clear that it was unlikely that they would be able to change this situation they had in the slightest. And besides, it was unlikely that his wife would be willing to reconcile. Usually, if a woman began to press exclusively in the direction of money, then nothing could not be changed. You have to separate, break up, look for new people with whom you could build a relationship. Always gives me an example of the husbands of her friends. Well, if they are so wonderful, let her introduce a man, let him provide her from head to toe as she wants. Then why is she clinging to me? What am I? A win-win while she's looking for someone better. Barry was indignant, not understanding how he could tolerate such an attitude. "Barry, I'm always in favor of family. I'm always in favor of people making up, finding some words to make up with each other. But I think you're in a hell of a situation here. You can't prove anything to her," said the friend, shrugging his shoulders. "I don't think I can prove anything to her. I have to accept that she wants a divorce, so the hell with it, then we'll divorce. I even specifically told her yesterday that if she wants a divorce, we will divorce her." She looked at me like an idiot, as if I'd suggested some supernatural thing. Then her mother came in and we never got to talk, he said when they were already approaching the nearest village. The driver turned right, and they were just approaching the very house where the conflict had taken place. Only the man's screaming was heard. A woman stood nearby and peered into the house, seeing nothing. Barry checked to see if a weapon was nearby, got out of the car, and entered the house first. Arriving at the call, the policeman saved the little girl from her violent stepfather. But when he looked up and saw a picture of the girl's mom holding her in her arms, he was stunned. "What the hell?" said Barry, then swore pretty hard. He started swearing. Tears came to his eyes, and he was so overexcited he was almost crying. Everyone around him looked at him with a confusion of what was going on, and only he himself knew who the girl was and who the woman in the picture was. It was Annabelle, his ex. It was as if it hadn't been years since they had broken up. Everything spun around. Everyone became all about their own business. The girl, who was immediately in the car, the stepfather, was twisted rather abruptly. He looked like a man who didn't realize what was going on around him at all, shouting, waving his arms, saying that she had gotten what she deserved, as if it made any difference at all, especially when it came to corporal punishment for a small child who couldn't stand up to him and couldn't do anything in response. Barry hated it when he saw people who suddenly thought that if someone was physically weaker, then it was okay to bully them, to physically punish them just because the person couldn't fight back. And when it came to a child, things got even worse, and patience simply disappeared. "Here," said Joe with unconcealed anger watching the girl's stepfather. "Nothing, we'll sit in the monkey house for a while, then we'll talk. I can't stand such people who think they can do anything. Nothing, we'll take off the beatings, put the girl in some orphanage and no more beatings." He was clearly determined. He looked at his partner, but he could not see anything, as if he was looking at an empty place. "Well, we got to get to the station, or we'll be stuck here until all the villagers get here," said Joe. Went off in the car. Barry followed him. There was complete silence as they drove to the station. By the time they had dealt with the girl's stepfather, a car had managed to pull up, so they put the girl in one car and their perpetrator in another. The girl sat quietly in a special seat, looking at her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Almost arrived at the station, as the girl was immediately taken away by a psychologist. They waited for the social worker so they could talk about taking a statement later. Joe wanted to ask his partner what had happened that had knocked him out, but he didn't dare to ask such a question. However, his curiosity was so intense that it was literally already written all over his face. Barry did not want to say anything. He was completely immersed in his own thoughts and so upset that he could not utter a word. The boss was running from office to office, discussing something, saying something. They were waiting for the social services to arrive, and Barry knew that as soon as the social services arrived, the girl would be taken away, and he couldn't let that happen. Barry, entering the supervisor's office, looked at her with appeal. She stared back at him as if she didn't understand what he needed right now. Of course, as a person, as a mother, she was glad the girl had escaped such a fate. But as a police officer, she knew very well that cases involving children were usually very nuanced and hard to resolve. She already looked tired, but she knew she had a lot of work ahead of her. "Barry, what do you want?" "You better wait for social services. We need to take a statement from the girl. I don't know what else there was. It's scary to imagine what she could have gone through with a freak like that. We've already established the mother's dead, so the girl's in his care, and then what will happen to her?" he asked, staring at the supervisor blankly. She put aside her pen, raised her head, looked at him in response. "What will happen to her?" "Well, she'll be sent to an orphanage. Hardly anyone will adopt her. You don't usually get adopted after a crime like that," said the woman, but what Barry said next threw her off balance. "Maybe you won't put her in an orphanage. I think that's my daughter," said the police officer, and when Barry saw his boss, completely confused, staring at him with even more surprise, he realized he couldn't prove anything to her anymore. "So wait, let's go over this with you in order," she said, putting the pen away again, apparently hoping that now she would finally understand everything. She took a deep breath, exhaled, staring at him, as if that could solve anything. "You went on a call, saved the girl, jackhammered her stepfather, and now you're telling me it's your daughter." You could tell by the look on the supervisor's face that she had already stopped realizing what was going on altogether. She looked at him doubtfully, and there was no more doubt in her eyes about his sanity than there was about the truth of what he was saying. "It's long to explain, but I've seen pictures of her mother, and I had a story like this, so I'm sure she's my daughter," he said more insistently. "I can't just hand her over to social services. You realize I'll never forgive myself for finding her and losing her again." The situation spiraled even more. It felt as if they were in some cheap soap opera, not quite in real life and not at all in real life, where the problems were over the roof and without such sweet stories. The woman who sat at the table looked at her ward and did not understand why he was making such a big fuss, for it did not look like the truth. She pretended as if she hadn't heard him at all. You'd think that solved the problem somehow. He just walked out of the office and went to wait for child welfare. And when a tall, fat woman with red slits arrived, he immediately realized who she was. This woman had an Rosny look. The feeling was as if she was a giantess, large, ugly, with evil eyes. And as soon as she entered the room where the girl was sitting, the little girl immediately cried. "We need to know where they're taking her," said Barry. Joe, who was standing nearby, immediately stared at him. He had no idea why his friend would want to know where the girl was being taken. But so, I'll call and tell him more like a shelter at the hospital, at least for the time being. Okay, we need to get her in as soon as possible so she can calm down a bit, come to her senses. I hope you didn't organize any interrogations here without a social worker, without a psychologist, because you know me. If I find out that you violated her rights, you'll be in trouble, said the woman, threatening them with her fist. But then she smiled, because she knew very well that no one here would do such a thing. Too often she was here, taking other children. Come on, you guys, I'll write everything down. I'll let you know, I'll call you. Why do you need to know? I need to take a DNA test, he said, still looking at the woman. Now Joe was staring at Barry, not knowing what was going on, but Barry wasn't going to say anything now. He didn't care. The woman, who was already used to all sorts of things, only nodded. Of course, Barry. Let's agree that the doctor must come not in a white coat to take the damn test, because I don't want the girl to be afraid of doctors because of what happened to her. Okay, we gotta go because she's scared of me, said the woman. She suddenly leaned over the girl, said a few words to her. The girl gradually calmed down. This big menacing woman turned from an evil giant into a kind fairy. It felt as if an embittered mask had been applied just so that no one would ask any questions. I don't know what happened here, but I hope that the freak who hurt her will be punished, said the woman as she put the girl in the car. Barry walked them to the car, looked at the girl, who looked just like Annabelle, and couldn't believe his own eyes. It was too scary to realize that she was his daughter. Don't you think it's time to tell me what's going on? Joe asked, stepping out to his partner and friend, but Barry only shook his head negatively. He didn't want to say anything right now. Now was not the time. He went back to his workplace and continued to do his work, but the more he worked, the more he tried to distract himself. The more he thought about the girl who would now go to the orphanage and whom he would not be able to help. Everything inside was clenching with regret. He couldn't help it. It was all too scary. Was he really the father? Had she not had an abortion then? Or maybe he was nothing to this girl at all. There was no decision to be made. It was necessary to find out everything properly first. The girl was taken, but no one was hiding her. When the results were in, he could go to court. He could prove that she was his daughter, and then it seemed he could take her home. Except that the talk of home immediately spoiled his mood. Barry, barely out of the car, walked slowly toward the apartment. How was he supposed to tell his wife about this? And how could she in her right mind accept a child from another woman, and it was already perfectly clear that she was not going to accept anyone? She couldn't deal with him, and she couldn't deal with another woman's baby. You're even more upset than before, and I told you this job wouldn't do you any good, said Casey. She sounded serious, as if she'd give a lot for him to stop thinking about work right now. It was written all over her face that she was preparing for a completely different conversation right now. And now that she was standing right across from him, it seemed like the perfect way for him to break up with her right now. Look, I was once very much in love. It was a sick relationship. She and I broke up, but a few months later I saw her and realized she was pregnant. I tried to talk to her, but it was impossible, and the timing was right, more than right. I looked for her afterward, but I couldn't find her. I knew I had a kid somewhere, but unfortunately I couldn't find her. Said and blurted it all out literally in one breath. The woman looked at him and didn't understand why the hell she even had to listen to all this. Her face first became pale, and then so flushed that he was taken aback. So anyway, I was on a call today. When I got there, I rescued a little girl from a violent stepfather, but I saw a picture of Annabelle on her wall. That's definitely her. That's her baby, he said. Casey dropped the mug. The hot coffee that was inside the mug spilled out, the beautiful porcelain mug with blue monkeys cracked, and she, watching his actions, could not believe that this was her man speaking, that she was watching her husband tell her how he had a child on the side. Casey didn't know what to say to him. In a situation like this, few people in general would know how to act. Even if she was given a good 100 options, she never imagined she'd ever be in a situation like this. Wait, let me get this straight. Are you telling me that you have a baby out there somewhere? Casey asked, staring at him as if he was the only one who could answer that question. Yes, and I saw her today. She's a carbon copy of Annabelle. I'd already been told where she is, and I'll be doing a DNA test. No, wait, What the hell is a DNA test? Are you crazy? Do you realize what you're up against? You're going to have child support hanging on you, and you're going to have to pay until someone adopts her. And that not only do we not have enough of that money, we won't have any more money because you see, decided to play father. She was about to scream, and he could see that no matter how hard he tried now, he would not be able to change her mind. Apparently, she had her own opinion about the situation, and she wasn't going to budge from it. You don't understand. I don't just want to take the papers and then pay child support. I want to take the girl if she's my daughter. I want to raise her. For years, I've been looking for her. She was right here in the neighboring village. Who would have thought it? Can you imagine? He asked, and immediately a radiant smile appeared on his face. Casey looked at her husband and didn't understand why he suddenly looked so happy. She had never noticed anything happy or cheerful about the situation. She couldn't believe that when he found out he had a child, he was just pretending as if he was fine with everything. She was so angry with him, so eager for him to do something, to be explained to, that she just wanted to make him regret what he'd said. If you bring another woman's baby in here, you can be sure I'll leave you. She meant every word as she spoke. Her voice was stern, and it was clear that she wasn't joking, and he realized that this was no time for jokes. Are you out of your mind? Do you hear yourself? You're telling me that you slept with some woman and there's living proof that you slept with someone. You want to bring me here a baby that was abandoned by its mother? Casey exclaimed in surprise. She didn't give her up. I found out later that Annabelle died. The baby was left to her stepfather, and as you can see, it didn't end well for the baby. Besides, as a woman, you have to understand, wouldn't you want your child to have a father? He asked, looking at his wife with surprise, but Casey looked at him with completely distraught eyes. You idiot. Of course I'd want my child to have a father, but I wouldn't give birth to a goddamn man who'd run the hell away. Jesus, don't you realize this whole thing is just a divorce? She screamed, and now he realized that he wouldn't tell her anything, wouldn't explain anything. She was so furious now that it was as if she had no control over the whole thing. Casey paced all over the kitchen, not realizing how she could even hear this from her man. In her mind, it was as if she was a stranger here, as if she was talking to her brother, who you see was telling her how screwed up his family life was. But no, in front of her was her husband, who wanted to pin the baby from his past relationship on her and apparently wanted her to silently eat it all up, but she wasn't going to do that. So this is the last time I'm going to say this. I'm not going to say anything again later, she said, raising her palms. She made that gesture every time she wanted him to shut up. If you bring your last woman's baby in here, I won't even be here. Before you know it, I'll be packing up my stuff, leaving, filing for divorce. If you think I'm gonna put up with that from you, you're dead wrong. Casey spoke clearly, trying to mint every word, clearly going to prove to him in practice that he was wrong. But Barry realized at work that he couldn't prove anything to her. He'd known she'd say that, so he wasn't surprised. Casey wanted to make him emotional, to hear that he was wrong, but he said nothing, just got up, left the table, and did not have dinner with her. More than one day passed while the situation unfolded in all its glory. And somehow Barry arrived at work. His relationship with his wife was literally falling apart before his eyes. He no longer hoped that he could reconcile with her, but he looked quite disappointed. He did not understand how to prove to his wife that she was wrong, that the child should be with a real parent, with a real father, and not in an orphanage. It seemed that Casey was willing to choose the lesser of two evils. He'd rather have him pay child support than bring home a girl, but he knew she wouldn't agree to that either. When Barry arrived at work, his boss took him by the arm and dragged him into her office. It didn't escape the others that he was getting special treatment today. So right now you tell me everything, and if I realize it's all worth it, I'll help you figure it out. Until then, I don't know how to react to any of this. How the hell am I supposed to know that you decided to do a DNA test on a girl we just recently rescued? The supervisor asked. Barry didn't think at all that all this would fall on the boss's shoulders. Somehow it had all gone over his head. Now, being in the office, he realized that the situation was escalating. He thought he could do everything to bypass his work, but since the girl was involved in the case, it all came out in one continuous scandal. I could tell by the look on the boss's face that she wasn't happy. I'm asking you again, why the hell do I know the very last thing you're going to do is a DNA test? How the hell do you even know this girl has anything to do with you? Asked the supervisor, completely confused, not realizing that this situation was far more serious than it appeared at first glance. Barry took a deep breath. He would have to confess he simply had no other choice. Otherwise, he has to tell at least everything in general terms. I used to date a girl. I wanted to marry her. She was my fiancée. She accepted my proposal. But at the last minute, she just backed out. She just said she wasn't ready for marriage and decided I wasn't the person she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Barry told me honestly, trying not to miss any particularly poignant points. You know, it's not uncommon. Just why the hell would you take a girl back to your place? And disgruntled asked the boss, who clearly couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to know what the problem was. I saw her a few months later. She had a pregnant belly, but you'd have to be an idiot not to realize it was my baby. The due date was right, but by the time I found out, it was too late. You see, she decided she didn't want to be with me, so she ran away. I knew I had a baby growing somewhere. I looked for her, but it turned out she was dead. I got to the call, rescued the girl, and I saw there were pictures of Annabelle on the wall. That's my kid, you know. Except the supervisor didn't understand him. She pulled out papers, looked through them. He knew those papers had nothing to do with him. Apparently, she was trying to distract herself for at least a couple seconds to free herself from the information he had told her here. I don't understand why you think it's your child. We've already found out that the child has an aunt. She's on her way to us. She'll be here soon. What makes you think it's yours? Jesus, Barry, you're the reason we're in so much trouble here, and I'm talking to you like you're a kid. He looked at her and knew why she was angry. Probably if he were in her shoes, he'd be angry too. Their department had had enough problems lately, and now he'd added more. They had once been equal colleagues, but she had solved a pretty high-profile case and had gotten a promotion. When she got the promotion, she got tougher every day, more and more serious. All right, get out of here. Wait for this woman to get here. Oh God, I forgot her name. Sydney. Oh, her namesake it was. She said and sat down on the table. She looked upset, broken, very unhappy, apparently so tired that she didn't want to say or do anything at all. Look, I'm sorry, I've got a lot of problems on all sides, and here comes an opportunity, as if I could finally find some meaning, find a family. He said almost in a whisper, looking at his boss. Okay, I'm sorry, I understand how important it is to you, that you can't even imagine how many problems we have because of it. The department called, said we're taking advantage. All right, well, I'll figure it out somehow. Jesus, Barry, if I'd known how much trouble this job was in, I'd never have moved up the ladder. Take my advice, get out of this job, it's no good, she said. He looked at her and realized that she was already squeezed like a lemon. She had tears in her eyes, and it was immediately obvious that she was struggling to overcome all these endless problems. If it turns out she's your daughter, you'll have to pay child support. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through the courts, and trust me, it's unlikely any court will give the child to you. With a job like that, no one's gonna give you the baby. You're literally tied to the workplace. One step to the left, one step to the right, you're a runaway, she said. He knew what she was talking about, but he tried not to think about it. Have you talked to your wife about it? She asked, looking at him carefully, apparently trying to figure out whether he would lie to her or not. But he wasn't going to lie to her, especially since they were back on a first-name basis, as they had been a long time ago. It was as if there was no longer this social gulf between them. She doesn't want anything, says she'll divorce me if I bring home another woman's baby, he said, shaking his head negatively. Okay, we'll figure something out. I pretty much got it all sorted out, so if anything, we've done a DNA test to see if you're involved or not. You understand me? I'm hoping there won't be any more questions, so basically, you can relax a little bit. But I strongly advise you to look at other jobs. I don't understand why the hell I had to go with this promotion, she asked and then looked at her former partner. Look, Barry, my advice to you is, if you find out this girl is your own, don't take her right away. You don't know what she's been through, and you don't know what her disabilities are. Just observe her. Just take note that you might have a daughter. Go see her, visit her, give her gifts, socialize, but don't go to extremes. He heard her, but he wasn't going to take her advice. Whatever the little girl's problems, he had to try to connect with her, had to at least try to be a real father to her, a decent, involved one. As he left the office, Joe also approached him. He wanted to know what was going on, and since Barry had told his boss everything, he had told his partner, but he had added a lot more details. And when Joe heard all this, he was shocked. He could not believe that all this could be happening right here, right now, in front of his eyes, especially since it seemed to him that they had no secrets from each other. But it turned out they did. I never thought that you have a child somewhere, and at that we will see her purely by chance. Oh, by the way, Sydney's here, you know, Annabelle's sister. Maybe you could talk to her. Joe asked. Except Barry didn't know if it was the right decision to talk to Sydney right now. They'd never had a normal relationship. She hadn't liked him to begin with, except they'd been separated for a long time, and if the child had a father, why couldn't the father be given to her? How was an aunt better than a birth father? Barry walked over to the office where Sydney now sat waiting for the custody officer. He looked out the window, saw her sitting on the phone. Sydney looked confused. Barry's memory flashed back to the times they'd fought, almost to the point of a fight. If it had been up to him, he would never have discussed anything with her. He didn't want to see her. He wanted it all to go away and be behind him forever. But still, plucking up courage, he entered the study. When she looked up at him, she almost didn't recognize him at first. She squinted and then opened her mouth in surprise. "Barry, what the hell are you doing here?" The girl exclaimed in surprise, unable to take her eyes off him. "I had the same question for you," he said, hoping that she would soften and answer it herself. "I came to pick up my niece. What are you doing here? How did they even find you? That they called you here? Is this some kind of confrontation?" Sydney asked incredulously, looking around meticulously as if searching for a camera. He took a deep breath, exhaling, wanting to yell at her now. She was pretty jumpy. She could snap into a scream at any moment, at least she used to. But it had been 4 years now. Maybe she's changed. "I'm the one who works here. I'm the one who came to the call, rescued her, and recognized her. There was a picture of Annabelle on the wall, and I knew right away it was my baby." She smiled stupidly. She looked at him strangely, like he was the local jester. There were contradictory feelings mixed in her gaze. On the one hand, she was looking at him as if trying to understand what he wanted, and on the other, she was clearly mocking him. "Barry, I'm sorry, but what makes you think it's your baby?" she asked in surprise. "I've been seeing her for a long time, and when I saw her pregnant, it hadn't been that long since we'd broken up. The timing fits, and I remember her telling me she wanted a baby. She even said in front of you that she was ready to raise a child on her own, just to have one," he said, shrugging his shoulders. She looked at him doubtfully, Sydney, as if she wanted to say something to him and couldn't at the same time. He saw doubt in her eyes, fear of some sort, a strange feeling that she couldn't express. He really regretted that they hadn't had a normal relationship with her. Maybe now he would have had a chance to talk to her, but she immediately took everything in stride. Sydney was a person who was all about black or white. The rest didn't matter. "Let's not get into an argument over nothing right now." "All right," said Sydney, and her face looked guilty. "My sister wasn't exactly a model. I realized she had a lot of problems. I also realized that she was pretty seriously upset when you two broke up. But trust me, she didn't grieve for too long when she found out you left so easily. I don't know what she was trying to accomplish. Maybe she wanted you to bring her back. Maybe she wanted you to come to her again, to propose to her again, I don't know. They say good things about the dead or nothing," said Sydney. She fell silent, but he didn't interrupt her. She needed time to confess everything, and he wanted to give her as much time as she needed. "Look, my sister's head was a mess. If it was up to me, I'd have kicked her to the curb. I didn't love you, I didn't like you, but compared to the men she had, believe me, you were better than all of them put together. Yeah, I had a temper too. I realize now that I shouldn't have tried so hard to get you two to fight. I'm not arguing that it took less than 6 months from the time you broke up to the birth. But trust me, it's not your baby. He didn't understand how she could be so sure, but she looked at him quite calmly. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe she wasn't the flighty hysteric she used to be. It's not your baby. Just trust me, it's not your kid. My sister's had her share of suitors, and believe me, she's not as picky as I'd like her to be. Forgive her and move on. It's not your problem, said Sydney. There was silence. Sydney was staring at the table. Apparently, it was hard for her to talk about her sister, much less say such things. She looked at Barry and shook her head negatively and just apparently wanted to reassure him somehow. After all, who knows what feelings he was going through right now and how hard it was for him to listen to all of this. Barry, I know it's been hard for you and me to talk. I also understand that you're not really in the middle of anything right now. I know you and I have had a very difficult relationship. Maybe if you and I hadn't fought so much before, we'd have a more productive dialogue right now. You think I'm saying this on purpose to take your baby away from you? If it were up to me, I wouldn't have taken her at all. I don't even know her. Sydney was honest. She stopped talking again, took a deep breath, exhaled, and leaned back in her chair. He placed the chair next to her. Apparently, she didn't want to speak too loudly, and who knows what secret she was trying to keep. She had more than one lover. While you were together, she would come to me, telling me how she found more and more fools who, you see, promised her golden mountains. She and I fought about it all the time, and when she got together with some idiot who saw nothing beyond his own nose in prison after you, we broke up. I knew how hard her life was. I knew how bad it was for her, but she never once asked me for help, and I never offered to help her. And you blame yourself for that? He asked, looking closely into her eyes. Now he was trying to figure out whether she was lying to him or not. Honestly, she was old enough to make her own decisions. It wasn't like I could follow her around all the time, wiping her snot. She decided she wanted to go around with men, decided this one was much better than a serious man. If she made that decision, let her deal with the consequences herself. But when I found out she was dead, I knew it was all a setup. She said, "Wait, what are you saying?" Barry didn't know anything about how his ex-girlfriend died. He must have gotten so lost in the case that he didn't even bother to look up the cause of death. It became embarrassing that her sister knew more than, even though he was the one on the police force. When I arrived, I was told she had suffered a cardiac arrest, but I'm sure she did it all on her own. Apparently, she decided she'd made too many mistakes in her life. I just don't know what she was thinking when she left her child to this man who was hardly human. But did she want to kill herself? If you think back to their past together, Annabelle had never even thought about it, never even stuttered. She really loved life, made plans, everything she had, as if she had planned for a dozen years ahead. The last few years she had changed completely. The last time we talked to her, she kept saying that she wanted to change her life, that she was not satisfied with everything. I offered her to move in with me, but since we were fighting, she refused. I found out just a few days later that she was gone. I tried to get the baby right away, but no one would give it to me. The very stepfather, who is now facing imprisonment, was sure that he could give this girl everything. Nobody would even listen to me. Who would listen to an aunt who had nothing to do with the girl? Sydney was silent. He understood her, but it was as if he was ignoring her words. Yes, and she could see for herself that he was still in shock at the news that everything was a setup. Believe me, it's not your baby. You can do a DNA test, but trust me, Barry, it'll come back negative. There's no way you're gonna find the father of that baby right now. I don't think she even knew who got her pregnant," said Sydney. "My sister thought that when she got pregnant, when she had a baby, it would be an incentive for her to change her life completely. But she was still very quickly back to where she started. When Barry's social worker walked in, she had to get out. He was standing in the hallway, watching Sydney's face change carefully. Sydney was clearly not happy about having to pick up the girl now. It was good, of course, that she had agreed to take her niece after all, but there was no joy in her face. The DNA test he had done was about to show its result by now, but in the meantime, the girl would be attached to her aunt. Barry felt hurt, disappointed, some unpleasant feeling inside. Had he lived with his beloved for so many years and lived in deceit? Had she cheated on him, and now he would have to deal with the consequences of her betrayal? Mary stepped back and now just watched from the sidelines. He needed to calm down immediately because otherwise he would get so worked up that he wouldn't be able to let this situation go. "Holy shit," said Joe. When Barry told him about everything now, he could only tell his colleague because he was sure that he would never tell anyone anything. "You've got a whole Brazilian soap opera going on here," Joe exclaimed. "I'd give a lot not to have anything like that. You know, it's been years, but it still makes me sick to my stomach to feel like I've been cheated on. I've lived in deception for so many years, I didn't even realize I was just a lucky break for her." He sat in silence. Joe put his arm around his shoulder. He didn't know how to support his friend, because in this situation it was hardly possible to support a friend, to calm him down properly, to give him exactly the kind of support that a colleague and a friend counted on. "You know, there are some men who absolutely do not care about their women. They force them to have children, tie them to themselves, and then don't let them go," he said. "And there are women who cheat on their husbands, looking for a more lucrative place to live happily and not see any problems in this life. But there are other people, you know?" He understood what Joe was saying. His friend and colleague wanted to say that life didn't end here and that all people were different, that he would meet someone who would be close to him spiritually, who wouldn't shit on his soul. Sydney came out of the office with the social worker. She was holding some papers in her hands. Her face was upset. She didn't even look around. Apparently, she didn't expect Barry to still be sitting there. He hadn't even called her himself. She didn't care, literally had it written all over her face. Sydney exchanged a few words with some other staff member and followed the social worker. She would probably now be called to the orphanage where she would meet the girl, or maybe she would be sent to the hospital where she was lying. No one had given Barry the details. Now he didn't pass as someone who had anything to do with the case. Talking to Sydney had knocked him out of it a little. It was as if Barry couldn't hear what was going on around him. It was as if he was in prostration. Thoughts were blending together into some one unceasing stream. His head was fully loaded. Sometimes it seemed to him that several 24 hours had passed since the conversation. In fact, only a few hours had passed. He was so deeply immersed in the memories of his past that there was no way he could give them up. There just seemed to be no end to these memories. Here he meets Annabelle. Here he embraces her. Here he swears his love to her. Here he arranges a romantic evening, gets down on one knee, asks for her hand in marriage. She rejoices, claps her hands, throws herself around his neck. And here she stands and says she's not ready for married life. Her pregnant belly, the accusations that she doesn't want to be with him, it's all been some kind of one nightmare. "Don't you think you're getting a little too loaded?" Joe asked. They were all getting ready to go home. Barry walked to his car, looked in the direction of his coworker, his partner. "I guess I didn't think enough before, and now I've decided to take it all in one fell swoop," he said with a smile. He said with a smile, as if that could justify it. "Don't worry too much. It'll all work itself out. I always say, if you can't solve a problem, let the problem solve itself," said Joe, who didn't know how to support his friend, because after such news it was unlikely that any support would be appropriate. On the one hand, Barry felt resentment, pain, desire to understand the situation. On the other hand, he felt disappointed that he had trusted a man he shouldn't have trusted at all. When he arrived home, he saw his wife. However, he was ready to fight her back at once because he did not want to start this endless conversation where he was wrong about everything. "We need to talk," she said, walking him into the kitchen, except Barry didn't want to talk. He nodded and went into the bathroom. He stood in the shower stall, turned on the water, and listened only to the sound of the water. In these moments, he was getting at least a second of relief. Everything was too complicated. Would he really be able to make a decision right now? Would he really take it? Divorce her if she now said she didn't want to continue a relationship with him anymore? On the other hand, he did want to take his daughter home after all, and his wife clearly didn't want to let anyone else into his life. "Are you coming soon?" she asked impatiently. She knocked on the bathroom door. He answered her that he would be out soon. He didn't understand her impatience, and besides, he didn't want to deal with the situation right now. He had enough problems to deal with right away. She suddenly wanted to burst into his bathroom, not even letting him shower in peace. Why that situation made him angry. In another situation, he wouldn't have even paid attention to it. But now for some reason he felt uncomfortable, as if she had taken away his only opportunity to be alone with himself and his thoughts. "Look, let me take a quiet shower, and then I'll come out and we'll talk." "Okay, I had a really hard day. Give me a chance to just exhale," he said grudgingly. He heard her immediately step aside. It was clear that she was offended by him, but he didn't care. If she wants to be offended, let her be offended. He was tired of indulging her whims. It was hard to bear the constant arguments every time. "Don't you think your work is ruining our relationship?" she asked through the door, and that was too much. Barry turned off the water. He stepped out, slowly wiped himself with a towel, changed into his homemade sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. Under that tank top, even his broad shoulders seemed less imposing. When he came out, she took a few steps back. She looked very serious, but her lower lip quivered. Her lip always quivered when she pretended as if it wasn't a big deal while she barely had the patience not to yell at him and nothing. "I'm shocked at you, of course. Couldn't you wait? I was working like a damn man today, and today in general, I lived half my life at work, and you, instead of holding your tongue, just to wait, interrogated me under the bathroom door. And if I'd been in the bathroom, you'd have come to interrogate me too." Casey abruptly turned in one place and went into the kitchen, making it clear that she was going to talk to him, but she wasn't happy with the conditions there. Barry rolled his eyes and thought that maybe divorce wasn't the worst option, especially since she was slowly losing it and it was getting harder and harder to communicate with her every time. "Look, we need to talk to you once and for all. I don't want to replay this situation every time and expect that you and I can still have a future together," she said. "Go ahead, tell me how you don't like me. I'm screwing up your life, right? You want to live beautifully with some man for the sake of money, and I, such a lousy guy, do not give you. Yes," he said, making his voice as childish as possible. "Stop clowning around." He waved her away because he knew she was going to start yelling. He didn't want to listen to hysterics and yelling again, but apparently he had no other option at all. "You don't understand. If you don't love your woman, someone else will. I should have told you we were splitting up, but you don't listen to anyone but yourself, and you can't do that. You think I'm going to wait forever while you work your damn job and wait for a promotion?" She screamed, and he realized that things were only going to get worse from here. "You don't have to wait. You can turn around right now. Go your man. You said all your girlfriends have husbands who are so wonderful, providing for them from head to toe, working up a sweat so your girlfriend can buy a new cell phone. Really? Well, then go find yourself a man like that, or beat your friend off. Judging by your new values, it doesn't make any difference to you. Okay, I'm tired. I don't want to talk about anything right now. I'm tired of you, of this situation, and in general, all this is stressing me out," said the man. She stared at him as if he had cursed her. Apparently, she thought that after this conversation he would come to his senses and do what was good for her. But after that conversation, she realized only one thing, that he no longer valued their relationship. "What have you decided about the baby?" she asked, hoping that at least here she would not be disappointed, but he already knew that the answer would not satisfy her. "I've already done the DNA test. If it proves that she is my daughter, I'll take her home and that's it," he said, adopting a tone that did not tolerate objections. She was still staring at him, but it was obvious that she was barely holding back from throwing a tantrum out of nowhere, because she didn't understand at all at what point he had decided he had the right to ignore her own requests completely. "So between me and some girl you just recognized, you're going to pick the girl? Do you really think being a single dad is better than being married to me?" I asked, surprised. Barry rolled his eyes. What kind of words did he have to explain to her for her to finally understand? Of course, Barry was no fool. He understood perfectly well what she was not happy with. She wants to hear that he'll do anything for her. He'll buy her everything, that he'll provide everything. She'll just enjoy life. Oh well, and brag to her girlfriends. "Of course, you don't care about me at all. You treat me as if I were a stranger to you," she said in a hurt voice. "And you make me quit the job I love. You make me give up my own daughter. You give me a headache every day. You threaten me every day that you will leave if I do not act exclusively according to your rules. And after all that, you're telling me I don't love you. I treat you like you're a stranger," he asked. The argument was strong, and she could not counter it. It was immediately clear that she was confused, and that confusion made her uncomfortable. She went off to pack her things. She must have hoped that he would come back, that he would make her stop. But since he didn't follow her, she went into the kitchen herself. This was really starting to feel like an endless soap opera. Okay, I need to think. I'll stay a couple more days. If I decide to leave, I'll leave and you can't stop me, she said, cocking her head. I won't stop you. I'm really tired of you. You don't want to be with me. It doesn't suit you in every way, but the hell with you. It's not my problem. I've done everything I can to make you happy in this relationship, but you've decided that it's not enough for you, that you need a bigger piece. So look for your peace somewhere else. His words shocked her even more. She stared at him, unable to believe that he had said such things to her, and how she could fight with him after that and still be right. She retreated to the bathroom, sobbing as loud as she could. And here was another manipulation that didn't end in anything. Here came the calls to her friend, her mother. Everything was the same. A few days later, Barry arrived at the station and never saw his wife during that time. She went to her mother, decided to think away from him, apparently decided that while she was at a distance, it would be easier to make a decision. Barry felt the most genuine peace for the first time in a long time, while his wife had been away so long. But now he was called to the office to hear the results. When he arrived, he was immediately met by a co-worker who wanted to come along with him. He wanted to support him, wanted to give him a chance to feel a strong, friendly shoulder. After all, in such a situation, it was scary to be alone. You, the main thing, do not worry in any case. Everything will be fine, you'll see. If she is your daughter, well then we will try to make sure that you establish a relationship with her. And if she's not your daughter, well at least you saved her life and maybe saved her future, said Joe. A very skinny, petite girl was standing just outside his office, waiting for him to approach. When she saw him, jumped up on the spot, handed him an envelope. He signed and she left. When he entered the office with Joe, Barry immediately opened the envelope. He cast his eyes downward. He was not the girl's father. A silence hung inside. It felt as if he couldn't help himself. First a wave of anger rose, then a wave of fear, resentment, frustration. After all, Sydney was right. He had absolutely nothing to do with this girl. But he still had a desire to see the girl one last time before Sydney just took her away to a whole new town where the girl would have a new life. Look, but it's not that bad. Your wife said she didn't want you to bring the girl home. But you could hear the doubt in his words, and it was clear that the doubt was more from ignorance of the situation. Joe didn't understand how anyone could stop a man from bringing home his own child. What are you planning to do? I'm going to call Sydney, arrange to meet with the girl and herself, say goodbye to them one more time, and then I'll deal with my own life. I'm so tired, to be honest. I don't know if I should take a vacation and go somewhere, just to feel that everything is back in place, said Barry. Barry could hardly stand it when the day was coming to an end. He'd already called Sydney. Turns out he called her just in time. She wanted him to drive up, and she'd set aside a time to pick up the girl to fit him in. By the time he pulled up to the shelter, the girl was already sitting in Sydney's car. She saw him and waved both arms at him, happy to see the man who had saved her. Look, I warned you. I'm really sorry about what happened, but it can't be helped. That's the kind of sister I had, said Sydney as he handed her the sheet that contained the results of the DNA test. Barry remained silent. This time he waited for her to speak again, because she was obviously going to keep talking to him. She looked at him with regret, but it was obvious that she felt guilty about her sister's behavior. She'd always been like that since high school. I'm sorry you had to deal with it, but I really don't understand how you could believe her from the beginning. She's always been the kind of person who can't keep herself in her own pants. I'm sorry that you fell in love with her and that it had those consequences. But even though she was a complicated person, I think deep down she loved you. Maybe she blamed herself for breaking up with you until the very end. Did you decide to take her after all? He asked. My own niece. I have no choice. My conscience will not allow me to leave her in an orphanage and live in peace. I'm sorry for what happened, but I certainly can't just blow it all up. I should be so much wiser than my sister, but sometimes I think I'd rather be like my sister. He looked at her in disbelief, but Sydney immediately went on talking so he would know what she meant. No worries, no worries, no worries. You only think about yourself, she said, shrugging her shoulders. She'd gotten herself into so much trouble, so much debt. It's a blessing that it can all be settled through the courts. Okay, we really have to go. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Sydney looked him straight in the eye, but Barry couldn't stand it and looked away. It was hard to talk to her, hard to ask the question he was afraid to hear the answer to. A grown man, a serious man, caught a lot of criminals, and he was afraid to just ask a question. Tell me honestly, who is her father? He asked quietly, apparently wanting the girl not to hear anything. A strange expression immediately appeared on Sydney's face. He realized what she was feeling inside right now. Apparently, she really knew the answer to that question, but either she didn't want to tell him now, or she just didn't want to admit it. Are you sure you want to know the answer? She asked. He nodded. Sydney took him aside, looked once more at the girl who was turning the radio button on and off. When you were together, you had a friend, Tony. When you were at work, he'd come to your house and they'd have all kinds of fun there. I'm sorry you have to hear all this, but I'm so guessing he's the father, because she didn't have anyone else afterward, and it was just him and you for almost a month before that. So the timing is basically just him. But knowing my sister, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was some other man there at all, said Sydney. The upset got even worse. Not only was she cheating on him, but the betrayer was his best friend at the time. Barry felt like he was being crushed by the press, but tried to keep his face, as they say, to at least pretend for a little while that he could handle the information. Okay, we should say goodbye, said Sydney, forcing a smile out of himself. He said goodbye to Sister Annabelle. Barry walked over to the little girl, shook her hand firmly, handed her a candy bar he had bought on the way. She thanked him for saving her and was now clapping her hands happily that right now she was going on a trip because, as it turned out, she really liked to ride in a car. As they drove away, Barry was left standing in one place. On his right-hand side was the orphanage, and there, ahead of him, a distant car. There sat the very girl he wanted to take home. It felt as if his past was now one continuous black pit. It was hard for him, painful, but he realized that he couldn't do otherwise. He had to take the girl in if she was to turn out to be his daughter. He walked slowly towards his car to drive home. His thoughts turned into one continuous lump. He wanted to stop at some bar, drink himself into a stupor and not worry about anything else, because he was so tired, and the tiredness was so heavy. Barry thought that when he got home he would go straight to bed and not think about anything else. So much unpleasantness had happened in the last few weeks that he could barely pull it all off in his head. Turns out Annabelle hadn't just cheated on him, she cheated on him with his best friend. And he and Tony were firm friends, literally spending all their free time together. Barry then thought that he was very lucky to have a friend who was like a brother to him. But it turned out that fate provided him not a brother, not a soulmate, and the most real trap. Memories surfaced in his head and disappeared again, like ghosts of the past. He wanted to go to the grave, to do anything to talk to her, to pretend he was talking to her. He felt such anger at her, while feeling frustration towards himself, because he couldn't do anything about it either. He walked home. His mind was a mess. He tried to keep himself in control, to keep his sanity at least a little bit. "Why are you divorced?" the neighbor asked. Her voice snapped him out of his reverie. Barry was just remembering that conversation with his ex, where she was standing there holding a small pregnant belly and he was trying to find out from her whether he had anything to do with the baby or not. "What, you deaf motherfucker, I'm asking you, aren't you divorced? Your wife was leaving here today with her things," said the neighbor. "Well, apparently she divorced me, because I don't even know yet that she packed her things and left." The neighbor stared at him, surprised at the calmness with which he was saying all this. She picked up his friend and immediately took her aside. "Barry, can I help you with something? You look so lost, like you're sick. Don't you worry. So your wife left you and you don't even know it?" she asked, a little confused. "To be honest, we haven't been getting along well lately, so I'm not surprised she packed up all of her things and left. She'll be looking for a rich suitor, and I don't have anything to do with good men these days. You see, I don't earn enough to keep our princess happy." "What a fool, Casey. Oh my God, did you really leave him?" the neighbor asked. "Oh, go with God, Barry. You're scary to look at. You've got no face." She let him go, saying she'd listen to him anytime. She followed him with a glance until the man's large silhouette disappeared into the entryway. Apparently, she realized how hard it was for him and didn't want to rub his already open wounds. When he entered the house, the place was empty. The emptiness was unnatural. She'd purposely chosen a day when he was working late and figured she'd have time to pack her things and move out quickly. Who knows if she went to her mother or decided to find some man on the side. "So much for marriage for life," said the man aloud as he looked around the apartment. She hadn't just packed up her stuff. She had made a pretty serious mess. He began to slowly pack up his things to tidy up the apartment because he didn't like living like this. He wasn't an ardent fan of cleanliness, but the obvious mess annoyed him too, especially now. He wanted peace of mind, coziness, to be in peace and quiet, not to think about the fact that his beloved is unknown where she is now. While he put the apartment in order, he felt better and better. When he woke up the next day with the full realization that his wife was no longer around, that she had packed her things, that she would never come back, he was relieved. If marriage is always like this, he certainly didn't want any new relationship. Joe was right. People are different. They shouldn't all be lumped together. But in this broken state, he didn't need any new relationships right now. When the doorbell rang, he was almost certain it was his ex-wife. She left 2 pairs of shoes that had ended up under the bed. He pulled them out, put them right by the door for her to come in and pick up. But when the door opened, he saw her mother. The old woman was crumpled on the threshold, looking at him with the hope that he would let her in, that he would not ask any unnecessary questions, and she would be able to talk to him normally, not as they usually did. "You let me in, I give you my word not to raise my voice, not to insist. I'd really like to talk to you, just like a human being. We're not strangers to each other, right?" Nanny asked, and Nanny looked like a person who was ready for absolutely any compromise. He let her into the apartment, trusting her promise, because she always kept her promises, unlike her daughter. When she entered the kitchen, she immediately began to put the kettle on. She started the dough for pancakes. Apparently, she decided to do some good so that he would not kick her out early. He realized it at once and did not say anything to her. If the old woman thought it would be better, so be it. Besides, he wouldn't refuse her pancakes. She looked at him with regret. "We both know exactly why I'm here, don't we?" said Nanny. But she didn't wait for an answer to her question. She looked at him as if he was her last hope. "I know as a mother-in-law, of course I'm not a gift, but I'm not a bad person. I've always wanted only the best for my children. I was raised in the family tradition that family is the most important thing. From the very childhood, I taught them that they should keep their families safe, that there is nothing more important than a close person near them, who will always give a helping hand and to whom you will give a helping hand." She stopped talking, removed 1 pancake, immediately put the second pan to bake on 2 at once. It was faster that way. "But I don't understand where or what I did wrong. I don't understand why all of a sudden she chose a golden calf instead of a family, why she chose a golden cage instead of the comfort of home, love, and care. But you are the only person who can talk sense into her, and the only person she will listen to if you can make your position clear to her," said the older woman, and now she waited for him to respond. Enough time had passed since the last conversation with Casey that Barry remembered perfectly well. He hadn't counted on having to talk to her again at all, but he couldn't tell this older woman that he would be much better off without her daughter. "I won't prove anything to her. She drank my blood day in and day out, telling me that she didn't have enough money, that I should open a business. Every day it went on, I could hardly stand it anymore. It was only a matter of time before we broke up. She needs money. She needs friends with good husbands. She needs another life where everyone around her will idolize her." The older woman looked at him with such pain in her eyes that his insides clenched. His own mother had been dead for a long time. That look, he remembered, the look of a worried mother who can do absolutely nothing to help her child she loves so much. Here was Nanny who loved Casey, her daughter, her golden girl, so very much, but there was nothing she could do to help her. She watched Casey at full speed trying to drive off the good road, all just to try her luck at a richer life. "Don't get me wrong, I'm just a working man. Yes, the position is good. Yes, the pay is good, but she can't get enough. You see, she needs me to bring home almost $1 million, to buy everything for her at the snap of her fingers. I can't give her that kind of life, and I can't listen to her every day that I'm bad. I realize you raised her differently, but as people get older, they raise themselves. She wants a different life. Let her realize in this other life as she pleases. He said, raising his palms as if to show that he did not intend to do anything and that she had come here for nothing. When the woman had already put a full stack of pancakes in front of him, she looked straight into his eyes. She took his hands in hers, realizing that she had no more reason to stay here. She couldn't just sit here and talk to him forever just to get him to reconcile with his daughter. Barry, she'll be lost without you. She's a good girl. She's lost her way. You help her. I'll help you. I'll talk to her. Maybe she'll realize she was wrong. You fit together like two pieces of a mosaic. You're like two cakes for one cake. She said such sweet things that he smiled. Except Barry realized that they were no longer two cakes, but rather he was a shawarma on a wedding cake that was about to become the centerpiece of the celebration. He couldn't say anything to his mother, knew there was nothing more he could do, that he couldn't change her mind. By the time Nanny left the apartment, she had just thanked him for listening to her. Apparently, she realized it was useless to ask him. She picked up her shoes and just went downstairs. He called her a cab to take her home comfortably because he didn't want to send an elderly person on a bus. Whatever this woman was, she had never wished him harm. Here, he didn't want anything of the sort. He stayed in the kitchen, smelling the amazing aroma of homemade pancakes. He smiled to himself. It even occurred to him that he probably missed too much in this life. He needed to relax. He needed to learn to move on with his life. He had a divorce ahead of him, a bunch of problems, more and probably would still be problems when he wanted to finally get a promotion. It was all much better than the complete unknown that had been just a few days ago. At the divorce, Casey arrived already with a new suitor. She smiled at her husband, who was about to become her ex. He didn't care who she came with. He didn't care anymore. If she wanted to show off like that or hurt him, it didn't help because he had very different priorities right now. He was facing a promotion soon. He was glad that his hands had finally gotten around to an interesting endeavor that had taken him completely over. In his free time, he was making repairs in his apartment. He could be happy that everything was gradually getting back to normal. Yes, from the outside, it seemed that his life was gradually destroying, but for him, it was all for the best. What already? Probably. Bite your elbows, you lost me. Casey asked with burning eyes, as if she hoped that his words would help her feel more beautiful, more desirable. Why should I bite my elbows? All I've lost is endless tantrums every day, and I think I can live without them, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Casey pulled back, not understanding why he wasn't giving in under her onslaught again. She bit her lip, signing the necessary paperwork. The next time she spoke to him was when he was on his way out. You're going to regret not stopping me, she said, cocking her head. Apparently, she was bursting with pride. So be it, but only in your head, he said. Then he just walked away to his car. He got a promotion. Just a couple months later, he was on TV, had an article published, and was offered a move to the capital, to a new position. He was perfectly happy. When Barry finally met Nancy, he realized what true love is when it's mutual. When Casey was never able to build a relationship with her new suitor, even though he suited her financially, he made demands on her that she didn't want to fulfill, and she ended up getting pregnant by him. He didn't want the child at all. She tried to reconcile with Barry, came to his workplace, but found out that he got not only a new position, but also on the accumulated funds, bought an apartment in Washington, D.C., lives there with his new bride. Casey was furious, but more angry only at herself for missing out on a man who truly loved her sincerely and accepted her for who she was.